for years now, you all have asked me to make this series. And today, we're finally going to begin this new journey together. The dark side of Rugrats. And I can't think of a single better character to start off with than Chuckie Finster. Chuckie is quite possibly the single most morbid character in the entire Rugrats universe. Don't get me wrong, nearly every other character here has their flaws and tragic moments, a lot of them buried under many different layers and some harder to spot than others. But as far as Chuckie goes, the writers of this show didn't really try to hide the dark implications of his character behind subtleties for even a moment. He's a simple 2-year-old boy who loves spending time with his friends, all of which are younger than him. However, the truth is, this 2-year-old boy has been through more than any of his friends could ever imagine going through. He's had to face more loss than even a lot of adults have, and to be honest, it's taken its toll on him. His outlook on life is completely different from nearly every single person that he comes across. His demeanor, his fears, they've all been shaped vastly different from those of his friends. When we zoom out on his character, though, it's a lot more than just the loss that shaped him into what he would end up becoming. Even into his teenage years, it's also the interactions with his friends. It's his interactions with society. And overall, it's the way that his perception of himself would evolve over time. Because truly, at the core of it all, one of the strongest traits of a character like Chuckie Finster in a show like Rugrats is the fact that he would be one of the few characters that actually saw legitimate character progression over the years. And not just minor changes like adding to his family or anything like that. I mean, actual, genuine, internal change that would influence the way that his character would be written and used in stories over time. Back in the beginning of the original Rugrats show, however, all the way back in 1991, the introduction of Chuckie's character would establish quite a few strong traits that would follow him throughout the entire series. Being slightly older than his friends, he would have noticeably better control over his motor skills and dexterity, making him the perfect choice for tasks like controlling a remote-controlled flying saucer in order to help them get things that are too high up, like we saw in his debut episode, Tommy's First Birthday.
We better try another pass.
At that, it's kind of always been understood that Chuckie is a bit more advanced than his friends due to his age. He stops using diapers and potty trains before they do. And of course, he even ends up saying his first word before they do. From the very first episode, we've seen him sporting the same head of shaggy red hair with purple square-framed glasses, as well as a blue t-shirt with the planet Saturn on it. He also wears some green shorts with wavy lines on them, and some red shoes, one of which is usually untied. Possibly his biggest character trait, though, is the fact that he carries a cripplingly high level of fear and apprehension on a pretty consistent basis. He's always the first to chime up if he thinks one of his friends suggests something that isn't a very good idea, which also could be due to him having a bit of a better understanding of the world than they do. Where they see curiosity, he sees fear, knowing what kind of dangers are lurking out there in the big scary world. Unfortunately though, his level of fear tends to drift into the irrational zone, carrying fears of eating oatmeal because the Quaker on the container of oats looks scary to him. Despite that consistent level of fear, however, he still gets dragged along into whatever terrifying thing that his friends are getting up to. Because even bigger than all of that, is the fact that Chuckie is loyal. He's the kind of kid that would rather be by his friend's side to face a scary situation in hopes that he can help rather than just run away from the scary situation and let his friends face it alone. What might hurt the most about all of this, though, is that even with every detail of his character considered, Chuckie is always, by default, chosen to be the bottom of the totem pole. He's sadly been designated the one in the group who always gets the short end of the stick, and honestly, that feels so wrong considering the role that he plays in their friend group. Throughout the first season of the show, if we're really being honest, it needs to be recognized that his character genuinely wasn't fully fleshed out yet. He was just kind of meant to fill the role of Tommy's older, scaredy cat best friend to both contrast and complement his personality type. One of the biggest moments seen in the show to support this would be in the season 1 episode, Real or Robots, when Chuckie stays the night at Tommy's house. Stu tucks them both in, and this happens.
Good night, Chuckie. Your mom and dad'll come over to get you in the morning.
This moment shows clear as day that Chuckie's character hadn't been fully developed and planned out in the long term yet, as his mom would never come to get him in the morning, because she would never be seen in the show at all. At least, not until we learned about her fate. But we'll get there. The thing is, season 1 wasn't chock full of episodes that expanded on Chuckie as a character. There weren't really any episodes that revolved around him or anything major happening to him. Not really any moments that expand on who he is or explain why he is the way that he is. No, Chuckie Finster didn't really get the opportunity to step into the spotlight until season 2. That was when it became pretty clear that plans for his character and a backstory for the writers to pursue had been kinda put into place. And the story that would be told about Chuckie would be one of the heaviest, most heartbreaking stories ever told. One meant to represent a specific portion of the audience who knows what it's like to face grief and overwhelming fear at such a young and fragile age. And of course, to help them not feel so alone in the face of life's struggles. And that's why today, we're going to dive into some crucial episodes of Rugrats that really peel back the many layers of Chuckie Finster and take some time to process and analyze the dark and morbid moments that are baked right into every episode, either in plain sight or hidden in the subcontext of everything. Because truly, the life of Chuckie Finster was a lot more twisted than you remember. This is the dark side of Rugrats. Chuckie Finster. Now, to start off this adventure, we're going to begin with an episode that's just so disturbing that it inevitably invokes a sense of inescapable dread, even if it isn't your first time seeing it. It's actually an episode that I covered in a past video years ago. However, it's extremely relevant for us to discuss one more time in the name of painting a clear picture of Chuckie and his place in the Rugrats universe, as well as highlighting just how quickly the development of his character escalated between the first 2 seasons. We're talking about Season 2, Episode 2, Chuckie versus the Potty. Now, this one starts out easy enough with Tommy, Phil, and Lil playing in the playpen in Tommy's living room when all of a sudden the doorbell rings. Dee Dee answers it to find none other than Chaz Finster, Chuckie's dad, extremely elevated, storming through the doorway with Chuckie under one arm and a little clown training toilet under the other arm. He walks right up to the playpen to set Chuckie down as he vents about how it just can't be done. He just can't learn how to use the toilet instead of diapers.
Everybody gets potty trained sooner or later.
Not my son. He's going to be taking diapers to work with him in his briefcase.
Of course, Dee Dee does her best to talk Chaz down off the proverbial ledge, saying that she's read all about potty training in Lipschitz and that it's really simple, so he can just go have a good weekend while she handles it. And, I mean, right out the gate, there really is so much to pick apart here. First of all, seeing Chuckie's dad bursting through the door in such a heightened state of frustration toward this situation feels kind of jarring in this context. We have to keep in mind, before this, we didn't really see much of Chaz at all. In Season 1, he showed up to drop Chuckie off a few times, hung out to watch the football game in Touchdown Tommy, and other than that, we really didn't see him that much. He was around, but what little we did see of him just made him seem extremely geeky and just kind of like a normal dad. This moment, though, being like the most lines we've ever heard him say at this point in the series, really made him seem a lot different from the Chaz we would come to know in the long run. Don't get me wrong, of course, he still gets overwhelmed, frustrated, and has some considerably dramatic reactions at times. However, it's hard to imagine him as the frustratedly storming through my friend's doorway with my toddler under my arm because I'm angry he won't potty train type. He ends up becoming more of the go out of my way to build my son up kind of parent. Hearing him fed up and saying that Chuckie's gonna be taking diapers to work with him in his briefcase just feels so out of character. But on the other hand, a moment like this is kind of crucial for painting a solid understanding of Chaz and the position that he's in as far as raising Chuckie goes. This was the first moment that truly indicated to us that he has a lack of a support system in raising his son. And sure, you can say that he has Stu and Dee Dee or Betty and Howard, but in all reality, most people at least have a co-parent to rely on. Having to approach parenting alone, especially as a first-time parent, not having your own parents close by to help you, it's an extremely difficult position to navigate through, and of course, it's easy to get overwhelmed and frustrated when you don't have another person that you can tag in for all of 5 minutes so you can just breathe for a sec and not get overwhelmed tackling everything on your own. Not to mention, other than Drew and Charlotte with Angelica, Chaz was the first one to become a parent out of this friend group. He's the only one of them who's had to raise a child on his own, and he's having to tackle major milestones before almost everyone else because his son is the oldest of the core group. At that, we can't blame Chaz for even a second for reaching out for help with his son when he really doesn't have any. But on that same note, letting another parent potty train your kid for you is honestly something that I have a bit of a hard time processing as a parent myself. But the more I process it, the more complicated the entire situation gets. Honestly, reading a parenting book or looking at studies for all of 5 minutes will tell you that it's more or less a recipe for disaster. Like, sure, it isn't inherently wrong per se, but potty training your child away from their own home can make the process significantly harder. Like, in a general sense, children thrive on consistency and familiarity, especially when it comes to learning big new things like using the toilet by themselves. Those things help children recognize the signals that their body is sending them and help them feel safe when it comes to actually doing the thing. Most experts will recommend that parents start off at their own home and build some stability from there for a few days before taking the process on the road. The last thing you want is for a kid to get safe and adjusted to this situation only to be taken to their actual home and regress before they get the hang of it again. Of course, regression isn't the end of the world, and it's something you can move past, but still, it's a big stick in the bike tire, the whole potty training situation. The ultimate truth about it, though, is that no matter what any experts, parenting books, or random guys in YouTube videos have to say about it, you can't judge Chaz for reaching out for help when he's overwhelmed and doesn't have any help at home. By all means, it's a million times better for him to ask someone who cares about him and his son for some assistance when he's spread thin already than for him to spread himself any further in the name of doing this on his own. In order for Chaz to be a good dad for Chuckie, he needs to make sure that he's mentally fortified and showing up 100%. And that's extremely hard to do when you have no village or even a co-parent. It's a pretty tough double-edged sword where I'm extremely proud of Chaz for not bottling up and snapping, but that doesn't change the fact that this is likely going to be a little bit confusing and hard to process for Chuckie. I mean, just imagine having another person's parents help you learn how to go to the bathroom by yourself. Like, it's one thing for your friend's dad to teach you how to tie your shoes or tie a tie or something like that. But in all reality, going to the bathroom is something that I personally think should probably be left to the parent or, at minimum, a family member if that's possible. But nevertheless, Chaz doesn't have that. All he has is the village that he's built with his friends and family. And that's something that I would absolutely amend my personal opinion for and never hold judgment on. I can't say that if I were in Chaz's position, I would or wouldn't do the same, because I'm not in Chaz's position and I don't know what that's like. I can't sit here and say that this is morbid, dark, or messed up for even a second, because this moment right here, this is real life. There are legitimately millions of parents in this world who have to face situations like this. Single-parent households accommodate for roughly 320 million children, with single mothers especially accounting for the vast majority worldwide. Meanwhile, single fathers make up only around 16% of single-parent families globally. At that, what kind of hypocritical, pretentious piece of garbage would I have to be as a father in a position where I'm raising my children with my wife to look at someone who makes up a part of that particular 16%, giving it their all as a single father, and say that they're doing wrong by asking their friends to help potty train their child because they can't figure it out? Sure, I guess on the morbid side, this shows just how hard the struggle to raise a child as a single parent is. However, again, I'm sincerely proud of Chaz. Disruptions to consistency and routine be damned. It truly takes a strong person to raise a child by themselves, and Chaz is legitimately giving it 110%, whether he gets understandably overwhelmed at times or not. And of course, the moments where he gets overwhelmed and has to reach out for help don't define him as a father by any means. As far as Chuckie goes, though, as you can imagine, he struggles with all of this from top to bottom. He sits aside, sadly, explaining to all of his friends through tears that the adults are trying to make him use this weird thing instead of his diaper. And of course, they all sit by in disbelief, thinking that isn't possible. But Chuckie reassures them that it absolutely is.
It's the worstest thing that's happened to me since my mom put me on the bottle.
Now, this is admittedly another huge moment for us to take in. This is the second mention of Chuckie's mom in this show. However, just like when Stu mentioned her, it's kind of done in passing and without much thought put into it. Which, in hindsight, feels so weird. especially coming from Chucky himself. Over time, as you'll see throughout the entirety of Chucky's story, it's like at some point the topic of his mom just kind of becomes this ominous, unspoken topic that everybody avoids at all costs. Like, I'm pretty positive when Dee Dee ends up mentioning her to Chaz later on in the series, in a really crucial episode, she frames it as "you know what," rather than directly addressing his ex-wife by name or what happened to her. On top of that though, during his interaction with Dee Dee, Chaz told her to just call the hotel if she has any issues or anything. And I mean, sure, Chaz could be going to a hotel by himself, but getting a hotel and going on a relaxing vacation while your best friends watch your son genuinely feels like something that one would do with their spouse. With all of those things in mind, it's safe to say that at this super early point in Season 2, they still hadn't fully fleshed out the rest of Chucky's family or the story there. I mean, we have a pretty clear understanding of Chucky himself and a minimum baseline understanding of Chaz. However, there's a good chance that this early on in the show, they hadn't made up their minds as far as Chucky's mom goes and what her role in the story would be. It's interesting to keep that in mind, however, because at this point, the angle that they're writing Chucky's character from isn't even one rooted in loss or unresolved trauma or anything like that. He just kind of is how he is at this point, and ultimately the fact that he's been through so much in his life would end up being an easy explanation to kind of retcon into nearly every hard thing that he's ever been through, whether that was originally their plan with his character or not. Going on from there though, Chucky's friends suggest filling his pants with napkins to simulate a diaper, or going through his toy box and just hiding it, or maybe just not going at all. However, he says that he tried all of those options and none of them worked. He's at the point where he's terrified that no matter what he does, he has no choice but to be potty trained. Seemingly out of nowhere though, Angelica walks up to the playpen and immediately starts mocking Chucky and the rest of the babies, saying that anybody who's anyone is potty trained, and accusing them of being scared. After just that bit of mocking though, Chucky has a bright and renewed sense of motivation to fight his battle, delivering a confident speech where he declares that no matter what anyone says, he's definitely not going to use his training toilet. But sadly for him, just as quick as that sense of motivation came, it leaves as he's overwhelmed by his need to go to the bathroom.
I gotta go!
Dee Dee comes running up in a panic, calling for Stu to get the potty, and as they set him up in the bathroom, she says that they just have to sit there and wait, being on standby to give him plenty of praise when he finally finishes his business. And as the two just sit there watching him, hours go by while Chucky just stubbornly sits there refusing to go and holding it in for as long as he possibly can. Eventually though, Stu and Dee Dee fall asleep after getting tired of waiting for Chucky, and his friends come up to check on him. And when they do, we get a look at what this is all really about. They ask if he's okay, and he says that he just really wishes things could stay the same way that they were. Which, at the core of everything, highlights a big driving force behind Chucky's character at this point. He's terrified of change. However, he's the one character who faces change more than any other baby. Not only in the fact that his entire life and family dynamic is so different from the rest of them, but also in the fact that he's older. Again, he has to face these milestones before the rest of them do. By the end of the series, though, moments like these end up being truly ironic in hindsight. Because, wholeheartedly, one of the biggest aspects of life that Chucky represents is change. having the ability to adapt, and at the end of the journey, being able to reflect on just how positive of an effect that big changes have had on your life. If there were anything I'd want you to cling on to for dear life as we approach the insane amount of episodes that I've got planned to deep dive into for the Chuckie portion of this series, it would be that. The amount of character progression that we see from him between this moment and everything that happens after, say, Rugrats in Paris, the movie, is potentially the most impactful aspect of his character. He's quite possibly the one and only character in this show that truly embodies change. And with that being said, he's likely the most relatable character in this show as a result. In all reality, the journey that we see him going through in this entire series is by far the most human and true to life of any told throughout this entire show. And the fact that he's the one character who's so terrified of change is just so ironic. Just like that though, after talking to his friends for a few minutes, he starts to think that maybe he actually didn't need to go after all. That is, until he stands up and proceeds to straight up have an accident all over the floor, leaving Dee Dee on cleanup duty in just as much disbelief as Chaz was. Confused as to how he could have went all over the floor when his training toilet was literally right there. Not understanding that the issue goes a lot deeper than she's even considering. Surprisingly enough, though, there is one person in the house who holds a certain level of understanding and empathy for Chuckie. And that would be Tommy's dad, Stu. He says that 2 is a perfectly reasonable age to be struggling with potty training, much to his wife's disbelief. And when he says that, his dad, Grandpa Lou, pops his head in the door, making fun of Stu and shaming him for the fact that he almost didn't get into the Scouts because he struggled to potty train for so long. And to be honest, this is a really interesting one. Right out the gate, assuming that he's talking about the Cub Scouts, considering Stu was born likely at the start of the 1960s, the minimum age to join then was 8 years old. And to be honest, that's way too old to be struggling with potty training and could be indicative of a possible further issue. But even bigger than that, this moment points out just how much this show acts as a social commentary on how parenting changes over time. In Lou's generation, it was normal to shame your kids and make fun of them for not being able to accomplish simple milestones that you failed to properly teach them. In Stu's generation, that's a lot less normalized among parents. However, they're still not perfect and, admittedly, nowhere near as attentive as the generation that would succeed them, who would end up being deemed helicopter parents. Hence, the entire basis of this show revolving around what kids get up to while their parents are completely oblivious. With that being said, even the most strict of helicopter parents aren't perfect. Because no parent truly is perfect. On the note of social commentary and how people change over time, it's also insane to take in the fact that prior to becoming a dad myself, I never really thought too much about Stu's dad and how he treats him at this moment and other moments like it. By all means, his intention is playfully giving Stu the business, and even seeing this as a kid, I just kind of shrugged it off and thought it was odd, then kind of silly that Stu didn't learn how to use the toilet until he was apparently almost 8 years old. Like, it kind of seemed as if it was supposed to be a funny character trait that was designed for people like his dad to poke at. However, in really analyzing this moment, especially keeping in mind that they're trying to create a welcoming environment for Chuckie to learn how to use the potty, Lou insulting Stu and casting judgment on him for something that he clearly feels self-conscious about, that was ultimately Lou's responsibility as his parent to teach him, just comes across so sanctimonious. It's as if he's having this mindset of, what do you know about potty training? You didn't potty train until you were nearly 8. When, in all reality, the fact that Stu took so long to potty train says more about Lou as a parent than it does about Stu and his ability to help potty train Chuckie. I mean, arguably, Stu is the one with the best approach here. Dee Dee's confused and frustrated cleaning up the floor. Meanwhile, Stu is over here assisting her and advocating for a bit of understanding as far as Chuckie is concerned. After all, it is their first time trying to get him to go this entire weekend that they've been watching him. As far as the rest of this episode goes, though, we see Chuckie continuing to struggle, telling his friends about how hard it is to even tell when he has to go because it's all just so confusing. All the while, one room over in the kitchen is Angelica, eavesdropping on their conversation. Right at this moment, though, something really small but incredibly telling happens.
Perhaps we should do for Chuckie what my mommy did for me.
Now, Angelica walks right over to the kitchen sink and she turns it on full blast, knowing good and well that's going to make Chuckie have to go to the bathroom. And of course, it works like a charm. However, what we really need to rewind and consider here is the fact that she says this is what her mom did for her, as she lets out this maniacal and just purely diabolical laugh. This moment isn't telling of Chuckie at all, but it gives you just a taste of Angelica and how deep that her issues tend to go. When the time comes to talk about Angelica and her journey throughout the show, there will be a lot to say without a doubt. But for now, I want to specifically hone in on the fact that there's a high likelihood Charlotte turning on the sink when she was potty training Angelica, who likely also struggled to potty train, wasn't ever done maliciously or out of spite like how Angelica is doing to Chuckie. It was likely a matter of her simply turning on the sink to a trickle to help speed things up while Angelica was already on the potty, not turning it on from the kitchen to mess with her while she sits in the living room minding her own business. With that being said, it shows you just how much that Angelica's intentions and the things that she does aren't really learned directly from anyone. She doesn't really have a malicious example to follow. She just naturally thinks about different ways she could weaponize the things that she sees the adults do to mess with the babies like the bully that she is. Which is just the tip of the iceberg as far as how twisted that Angelica really is as a person. But focusing back on Chuckie, of course, he hears the running water rushing into the sink and he starts to panic, jumping up and having to go to the bathroom. And Angelica just keeps messing with him further, turning it on and off and on and off, leaving him in tears and so confused, not able to figure out if he really needs to go or not. As the day turns into night, though, he decides that he's gonna hold it no matter what happens. We see him and Tommy laying in the crib and sleeping while Chuckie tosses and turns, screaming his way through a nightmare. In his dream, he sees himself sitting in a prison cell when Phil and Lil come in dressed as guards and they drag him out, taking him right past Tommy, who's dressed as a priest. And together, they all lead him to the chair. As an executioner stands next to the chair, awaiting Chuckie's arrival, Phil and Lil forcefully toss him on top of this huge toilet on an elevated wooden platform. He sits there begging for his life, saying that he's only 2, but sadly, it's no use. They aren't hearing any of it. Angelica pulls the lever and sends Chuckie down the pipes as he begs for mercy, screaming for his life. But as he twirls down the drain, he's shot awake, realizing that it was thankfully only a nightmare, and that he really has to go. So badly that Stu is legit startled awake by the sound of his stream hitting this little plastic potty. Of course, Stu walks in there, and when he sees that Chuckie ended up going all by himself, He calls Dee Dee, and the two praise Chuckie for being so brave and for finally doing the thing without anyone needing to help him. However, right as they're doing that, they're surprised by none other than Angelica, who walks into the bathroom crying her eyes out, having had an accident herself and just feeling completely helpless as she trails a mess through the house, walking around in nasty, soaking wet pajamas. Naturally, Chuckie feels accomplished and, oddly enough, even though it's the middle of the night and he was sound asleep, Tommy walks up and compliments him, reminding him of Angelica's words. Anybody who's anyone is potty trained. Now, on the heels of that one, I've got to be brutally honest with you all. I'm just now connecting dots that I had never connected before. And I've seen this episode a ton of times. Now, this part might be obvious to some, but I never really stopped to contemplate the sequence of events here. Now, remember how Chuckie went to the bathroom in the middle of the night, and it was so insanely loud that it legit woke Stu up from a deep slumber? Now that I stop and think about it, that was probably also what caused Angelica to have her accident, right? I mean, right before that scene happened, we see her messing with Chuckie, turning the sink on and off repeatedly in an effort to make him struggle with understanding when he needs to go to the bathroom. Then, as soon as that's over, we cut to nighttime, and it's not long before Angelica is coming in crying. I mean, if I'm really being open with you guys, I always just kind of thought it was a coincidence that Angelica ended up having an accident at the exact time that she did. I always just assumed that it was cartoon logic and that the timing of it all didn't have to have a deeper meaning. But when you stop and think about it, Chuckie had to go so badly that it could be heard loud enough to wake Stu all the way from his bedroom. And if Stu could hear it, odds are Angelica was able to hear it wherever she was sleeping upstairs also. In all reality, connecting those dots makes the karma of it all just so much more palpable, considering that it's essentially Chuckie doing the same exact thing that Angelica did to mess with him. Just completely unintentionally. Again, looking back now, it's pretty obvious in hindsight. However, I imagine there's a chance that a lot of you, like me, didn't initially watch this show with such a high level of attention to the implications behind every single thing that happens, and likely may have easily overlooked that minor detail that admittedly changes the entire way that you perceive the ending here. As far as Chuckie as a character goes, this ending genuinely highlights just how often that he can come out on top by simply staying in his own lane. Meanwhile, underlining the fact that Angelica refuses to stay in her own lane, and as a result, bad things end up happening to her. And due to the principle of forfeiture as it pertains to ethics, she's never really seen as the victim in the eyes of us, the viewers, when she's left crying and upset in the end, because her actions and behaviors leave us seeing her as more of an instigator than a victim. Her being left upset and in tears feels more like her getting her comeuppance rather than feeling like a sad little girl crying her eyes out. When it comes to Chuckie, it's not just his gentle demeanor and underdog nature that makes these moments when he comes out victorious come across so sweet. It's the fact that he doesn't even have to try to win. Because you can't beat a kid who doesn't even know that he's currently playing a game. As the dominoes fall, however, one of my favorite aspects about Season 2 of Rugrats is how much it really did open the door for us to see Chuckie's emotional side a lot more, and gave us a deep look at his character that goes further than just the fear that he constantly carries. And it proved time and time again that the substance of his character is nearly endless. He's chock full of empathy, caring, and of course a special hint of wisdom, the likes of which only he can offer. And all that just comes naturally to him. Next up, we're gonna check out an episode that comes loaded with some pretty heavy emotions, However, it perfectly embodies the sentiment behind Chuckie's kind-hearted nature. That would be none other than the episode Beach Blanket Babies. Now, if you remember this one even slightly, you might be thinking, how could a simple episode about these babies going to the beach come along with any dark implications? And in all reality, not only does this one get extremely morbid, but it's crucial to our pursuit of understanding Chuckie further and how he perceives the world around him. Because that absolutely influences how he processes all of the ominous and disturbing things that would end up coming his way throughout the entire rest of the show. In the beginning of this episode, we see Chuckie in pure amazement as he shows his new pet to Tommy, a fishbowl full of sea monkeys. Naturally, Tommy isn't all too impressed by this bowl of little specks. However, Chuckie, having never been able to have a pet before, defends them, saying that Tommy himself would look like a speck too if he was that little. Nearby, a similar conversation is going down as Chaz tells Stu all about how sea monkeys were his first pet as well. And just like his son, Stu questions the legitimacy of this pet, reducing them to nothing more than mere freeze-dried brine shrimp. Like Chuckie did, Chaz speaks up in defense of the sea monkeys, talking about how clean and low maintenance they are. But really, it's truly compelling to take a moment and recognize just how much these two interactions say about the different mindsets present in these men and how that's naturally passed down to their children. Tommy is the kind of kid who loves high-intensity, action-packed adventures. He loves to explore new things without fear, and because he's just a typical kid, he can do so without much worry. As a result, he's experienced a lot of big, exciting things in life. It takes a lot more than just some microscopic ocean-dwelling creatures in a bowl to impress him. Meanwhile, Chuckie, on the other hand, he's a lot more reserved and cautious. He prefers more calm and chill activities as opposed to the high-intensity, action-packed adventures. He will explore new things if Tommy leads the way, but he always does so with fear and apprehension. On top of that, allergies run in his family, so he can't have pets with fur, and he usually doesn't get close to animals in general out of fear. As a result, for him, something like sea monkeys can be fascinating because he's never really had the opportunity to get too close to more traditional pets like cats or dogs. That's something that Tommy has trouble relating to, and it's clear in his interaction around the bowl of sea monkeys. For Stu and Chaz, though, we see nearly the same exact identical interaction go down. Stu struggles to see the value in Chuckie's pet because he's not thinking about it from the perspective of a kid who can't get close to other animals for the most part. He's really only considering it from his own point of view. What's really captivating, though, is recognizing that just as much as the apple didn't fall far from the tree as far as both Tommy and Chuckie are concerned, they're still incredibly different from their fathers. Their thought processes play out differently from that of their dads, and as a result, they end up being a lot more like one another and coming to similar conclusions when their dads don't. For Chaz, his point of view is that sea monkeys are a great pet to keep. They're clean, you barely have to feed them, and you don't even have to walk them. For Stu, his point of view is that they aren't even really a pet because they're so boring. And for them, the conversation ends there. That's it. They just kind of agree to disagree and move on. Meanwhile, their sons end up having nearly the same exact conversation, but it ends up going in a completely different direction with a completely different outcome. As the boys sit there watching the sea monkeys, Chuckie points out how they looked a lot happier on the box. And Tommy agrees, adding that they looked a lot bigger on the box as well. Which is a pretty important moment. These are two completely different points, rooted in two differing perspectives. Tommy's is similar to his father's, being rooted in how small the sea monkeys are, and relying on that to make them seem irrelevant. Chucky's, however, isn't necessarily similar to his father's. His dad talked about how amazing it is to keep them around for your own convenience. However, Chuckie is sitting here thinking about the quality of life as it pertains to his pet. And this genuinely does speak volumes, as it shows how much of an empathetic, out-of-the-box thinker that Chuckie is, even surpassing his own father in that field. It doesn't matter whether or not the sea monkeys actually have emotions like happiness, because that's not the point here. The point is that Chuckie is taking the time to stop and consider the feelings of others, even if they might not have feelings. And that has power. It's mindsets like that which unite people who think differently. Whereas Chaz and Stu boiled it down to an agree to disagree and they moved on, Tommy and Chuckie boiled it down to a conversation that revolves around concern over if the sea monkeys are thriving and happy in that bowl or not. It's a very special moment that deserves to be recognized. Because where Tommy is the de facto leader of the group, Chuckie is the one who clearly possesses the power to unite people through his perception of life and his mindset that focuses on bigger things than just personal opinions of a living being's validity. Regardless of who is bringing the mindset to the table that opens the door for these two people of differing opinions to unite, however, it genuinely shows the power of being able to find common ground with somebody. You have a lot more opportunity to do good and make a change in the world when you unite with someone over one crucial commonality rather than arguing with them over minor personal opinions that don't really have an effect on anything productive.
I think maybe they want to go back to their castle at the bottom of the ocean. Yeah, if I had a castle down below the ocean, that's where I'd want to be.
Chuckie, with his empathetic and caring nature, wishes that he could help them get back to the ocean, which, of course, is where Tommy's adventurous go-getter spirit comes into play, as he pitches the idea that they work together to do just that. He brings up that they're going to be going to the beach today, and that his parents told him that's where the ocean is. So they just need to find a way to get the sea monkeys there. Sadly, just taking the bowl with them doesn't work, as Grandpa Lou catches them and takes it away, saying that the sea monkeys need to stay at home, and at that, Tommy comes up with a brilliant backup plan. He decides to open up the cooler full of drinks that they're bringing to the beach and just pour the bowl full of sea monkey water into it. Then they can just dump them into the ocean once they get there. Unfortunately for them, though, that ends up being a lot easier said than done, as the cooler is way too heavy for them to move on their own. When they see Grandpa Lou come up and take a can out of it, though, they realize that it's really just a matter of time of waiting for all the adults to clear out the cooler until it's light enough for them to drag to the shore and tip over. So, they decide to play the waiting game. As time passes and grown-up after grown-up takes drinks out of the cooler, eventually, this happens.
This ice is a little bit dirty. Let's try to keep the lid closed.
Don't worry, Chuckie. We'll save the rest of them.
Honestly, you guys, the devastation written all over Chuckie's face is just so tragic and harrowing. This poor kid literally just watched his best friend's mom pull one of his pets out of a cup and grind it to dust before his very eyes. Like, this was the same woman who helped potty train him, and he just watched her literally end his pet between two fingers. Sure, if you're like Stu, you might be thinking that it's just a small brine shrimp and that there's way too much thought being put into it. But to be real with you, that's just being blatantly dismissive. Whether the pet's a dog or a sea monkey is irrelevant. It could be a pet rock for Flying Spaghetti Monster's sake, and it still wouldn't make a lick of difference. Imagine your kid being emotionally attached to something and someone just comes up and destroys it right in front of their eyes, leaving your kid completely shaken and devastated. Like, even if this was unintentional, it's still gonna cause emotional harm to that kid. Even if it's just a brine shrimp, and Dee Dee didn't mean to, that doesn't erase the fact that Chuckie just watched that happen to something that he cares about. Something he's actively in the process of trying to advocate for and make a positive change for. Like, that's brutally tragic on all levels. Sure, he might only be 2 years old and he might not remember this happening in the long run, but that doesn't mean that it won't have a deep subconscious effect on his still developing brain. As this episode continues, though, Tommy and Chuckie finally get themselves in a position where they can push the cooler to the shore, but over and over again they find themselves interrupted by different obstacles. Eventually, after feeling defeated repeatedly, Tommy suggests to Chuckie that maybe these little specks aren't worth all this trouble and that maybe they should just give up. But Chuckie isn't having any of it, as he reminds Tommy that they know what it's like to feel like you're a little speck. That feeling they get anytime a grown-up walks past them and doesn't even notice that they're there. Or that feeling when they're not tall enough to open a door or turn on a light.
For all the little specks out there, I'm pushing that thing down in the water. Let's go!
Just like that, the two best friends march their way right over to the cooler, this time deciding to tie Spike's leash to it as Tommy rides him down to the shore, sending the cooler flying out into the water. But oddly enough, as the two friends stand there reflecting on the good deed they just did, Chuckie doesn't join Tommy in celebrating. He just stands there, sadly, looking down on the cooler as if he may have just made a huge mistake. Noticing that he's upset, Tommy stops right in his tracks and asks Chuckie what's wrong, confused because he thought he wanted to set the sea monkeys free.
After all we've been through together, I'll miss him. There's still time to say bye.
As Chuckie stands there with tears in his eyes, he says goodbye to all of his sea monkeys, listing their names individually through his cries of sadness. And just like that, as Tommy supports his best friend, telling him that he did the right thing, he reminds him that his sea monkeys will be down there eating more sea bananas than they could ever want, and that they'll never forget what he did for them. Now, this one is a monumental episode for Chuckie because it truly shows us just how much more emotionally mature he is than nearly anyone else in this show. When you really think about it, when it comes time for some true, genuine emotion to be shown, who's usually the first one to show it? None other than Chuckie. Even when you compare him to all the adults in this show, he seems to be the most in tune with his emotions. And that's something that we're going to see proven time and time again throughout his journey. He's not afraid to stop, shed a tear, and tell someone that he's struggling. Even in the moments where he can't put into words why he is struggling. He's very aware of his own emotions, which honestly is really impressive for a kid his age. But even more impressive than that is how much he pays attention to the emotions of others. Even teeny tiny creatures like sea monkeys. It shows how much he values life, regardless of the stature of the creature actively traversing this earth with its own body. He recognizes the validity in all emotions, big or small, whether they're his own or someone else's. At the core of it, it could really be gathered that Chuckie is portrayed as kind of an old soul in a way, albeit one that's still finding its way and still getting its bearings. Even still trying to get his bearings, though, Chuckie's moral code, his ethics, and his empathy, are still akin to somebody who's walked an understanding and caring path in life for decades. What makes this land even harder in multiple ways, though, is thinking back to moments like when he was having nightmares about toilet executions. You have this innocent kid who's just trying to stay in his lane and watch out for others as best he can, being targeted by someone like Angelica, to the point where he's having nightmares. But you can't help but wonder, where did the substance of these nightmares come from? When did this 2-year-old witness anything along these lines to inspire him to have this kind of nightmare? Could his young mind just have subconsciously cooked this up on its own? By all means, his dad doesn't really seem like the type to watch something heavy like The Green Mile, let alone in front of his 2-year-old son. Sure, it might be a stretch that even a rubber band would call impressive, but as someone who low-key wonders about reincarnation, I can't help but be curious about if maybe this could be rooted in some kind of memory from a past life that Chuckie's buried somewhere inside of his soul. Maybe in that original memory, he wasn't even the one being put in the chair. But due to the circumstances he was currently facing in that moment, he imagines himself being in that person's shoes when he's recalling it in his subconscious thoughts. Again, this episode did show us just how much empathy and care for others that he possesses in general. At the end of the day, though, I think that's one of the most compelling aspects of taking in Chuckie's character. The fact that, in a show like Rugrats, a 2-year-old like Chuckie comes across as the most grounded and emotionally intelligent character, despite him being in a constant state of unnerving fear. Even put next to a wise elderly person like Grandpa Lou, Chuckie seems astronomically more in tune with his emotions and the emotions of others by comparison. He's the type to consider a situation from an angle that a lot of others wouldn't ever stop to think about, and as a result, he sees aspects that others would have easily overlooked, and oftentimes ends up advocating for those who go overlooked as well. Perhaps one of the most impressive character aspects of this 2-year-old with an old soul is that he's never one to hesitate to do the right thing when someone who can't defend themselves is in need. Which, honestly, is weird to say because in all reality, that feels like something one would say about Tommy. However, Tommy was the one who was ready to call it quits and give up on the sea monkeys, deeming them nothing but little specks. But Chuckie wasn't having that for a second. Sure, he was pretty much just feeding the bigger ecosystem of the ocean because there's no way these little sea monkeys from an isolated fishbowl are going to survive in the wild, but it's more the sentiment of the action that matters here. On that note, though, this wouldn't be the only time where we would see Chuckie trying his best to advocate for those who he sees as needing help. However, the next time we did see him attempt to do that, it would end up having a lasting effect on his entire perception of himself and what he's truly capable of. That would be seen in the classic episode known as Superhero Chuckie. Now, Superhero Chuckie is an episode that's truly quintessential to our understanding of Chuckie and the expansion of his character in general. Up to this point in the series, which, keep in mind, is still pretty early on in Season 2, we've mostly seen Chuckie being terrified. When it comes to advocating for others, it's mostly been in the form of dumping sea monkeys into the ocean, like we've seen. This one, though, was admittedly a massive step in a bit of a different direction for his character. Of course, he's still the same old Chuckie, but after showing us a bit of how passionate he is about standing up for others, the writers of this show truly opened the door to exploring his bravery and just how far he's willing to go as far as advocating for the little guy is concerned. Now, weirdly enough, this one starts out with Stu and Drew at a production studio with Just Angelica and Chuckie for some reason, as they watch a live recording of the classic superhero show from the 1950s, Captain Blasto, the protagonist of which is voiced by the late great Adam West of Batman fame. As the group enjoys their time, especially Stu and Drew, who are childhood fans of this show, Chuckie is left awestruck and amazed by Captain Blasto, just enamored at the idea of getting to witness a real-life superhero in action. On the ride home, though, as Chuckie sits there with his inflatable globe that he got from the set of the show, he asks Angelica if Captain Blasto is a real superhero. And to absolutely no one's surprise whatsoever, Angelica, of course, decides to rain all over his parade, telling him that superheroes don't exist, and that Captain Blasto is just some smelly old man in a costume. And sadly, that sticks with Chuckie. When they end up back at Tommy's house and he's telling his friends all about how good of a time he had, he ends up stopping and hesitating for a moment to tell them this.
Angelica says he isn't real. She says Captain Blasto's just made up.
Of course, all of Chuckie's friends are taken back, assuming that Angelica is a liar because Captain Blasto is on TV, and they're under the impression that you can't put anything on TV unless it's true. Plus, as Chuckie adds, if superheroes weren't real, who would save the world? Right when he says that, though, the phrase takes a lot more of a literal meaning, as Angelica angrily takes the inflatable Earth souvenir that Chuckie got from the show, proclaiming that the world isn't for babies. At first, we can see this spark ignite within Chuckie as he starts to stand up to Angelica. However, when she shoots him a mean, ferocious look, Chuckie backs down and is left in tears, just feeling helpless against Angelica's evil and aggressive demeanor. He sits there, devastated to have had his toy stolen, as he wishes that Captain Blasto were here, knowing good and well that he wouldn't let Angelica get away with this, before he takes it a step further, wishing that he himself were the superhero.
Chuckie, maybe you are a superhero, only you don't know it. Maybe Chuckie is your secret identity.
Immediately, Chuckie starts to question this logic, saying that if he really were a superhero, he'd have a magic cape to make him fly and a superhero outfit. But as quickly as those words leave his mouth, his friends have whipped up a superhero outfit for him, including a magical cape made from a towel from a faraway mythical place known as the Motel Sticks. And from there, we see Chuckie's friends testing out his superhero abilities, thinking he can see through walls when he's able to guess that on the other side of the wall is their moms drinking coffee at the kitchen table, and thinking that he's got super strength when he's able to easily lift a chair above his head, not knowing that the chair is actually Stu's latest invention, inflatable furniture. Then, of course, when his cape accidentally pulls the plug on the chair, the babies are all convinced that he's using heat vision to melt it, not understanding that it was just full of air that's currently being let out. Chuckie, though, just isn't convinced. Even though he himself is also amazed by all of these things happening, he repeatedly brushes them off, refusing to believe for a second that he, of all people, could be a superhero. And more than anything, this moment really does sadly say a lot about Chuckie's self-esteem. Because we know that he genuinely believes in superheroes. When Angelica said that they weren't real, he didn't believe her, as he's confident in their existence already. But the issue here isn't his belief in superheroes. It's his belief in himself and his ability to be a superhero. And the reason for that is, painfully enough, the fact that Chuckie feels as if he's nothing more than just another face in the crowd. He feels like if anyone here is going to be a superhero, he's likely the last contender, which is really just so saddening to take in, especially when we consider how passionate that he is about helping others. Ultimately, if there were anyone here who would benefit the most from having superpowers, it would be Chuckie, because we know good and well that he would never consider using his powers for evil or to spite anyone. He just wants to help people and stand up for the underdog. Through everything, though, it would essentially be one specific occurrence that would end up leaving even Chuckie unable to deny the fact that he might just be a superhero. He ends up standing on this new climbing workout machine that Dee Dee recently got, and it sends him flying across the room, leaving him under the impression that it was actually superpowers that did that, and that he really is a superhero.
You want your dumb old world? Well, come and get it.
Angelica taunts Chuckie and he chases her, thinking that he's using his powers to fight her off. And while he's none the wiser, his cape falls off, making all of his friends think that he's doomed and that his powers are gone. But by the grace of Chuckie's own bravery, he musters up the strength to push Angelica, causing her to stumble onto a fire truck and go flying backward, sending the inflatable earth right back to Chuckie where it belongs and leaving her running for an adult, crying. And as Chuckie relishes in this heroic feat that he thanks his magical cape for, his friends all stand by, just awestruck at how brave and strong he is, pointing out that it didn't have anything to do with the cape, because that fell off a while ago.
You saved the world.
And you did it without your blue cape. It was nothing but Chuckie power.
All of Chuckie's friends thank him for saving the world, and as this one comes to an end, Chuckie is left seeing himself in an entirely different light, realizing just how much power is in his bravery and how capable that he really is as a person without needing any superpowers or anything like that. Throughout this entire episode, we've seen Chuckie do nothing but doubt himself. At the start, he doubted his ability to stand up to Angelica and to get his toy back from her. He just assumed that because she's bigger and angrier than him, that there's no way that he could ever stand up to the likes of her. As things went on and his friends were building him up, believing that he really did have superpowers, he was the one who was still doubting himself. No matter how many occurrences made it seem like he did have superhuman abilities, he'd still refuse to believe it, and honestly, that feels like such a deep statement about Chuckie. Because, again, it's not about refusing to believe that someone could have heat vision, super strength, or the ability to see through walls. It was him refusing to believe in himself. It was him being so fixated on the fact that he's just a regular, everyday kid that he couldn't even imagine a world where he could be anything more than a face in the crowd. And honestly, what it really boils down to is the fact that Chuckie truly doesn't see how special he is. And that's just so tragically devastating. Because he really is special, and it's evident through his actions and his thought process. He sincerely is a standout person for a multitude of reasons, all of which he's sadly unable to see. However, we need to pay close attention to what happened to Chuckie after he stepped on that climbing exercise machine that Dee Dee has. That moment when he went flying through the air, he was absolutely amazed, and that's what acted as a confirmation for him. It took something that grand and spectacular for Chuckie to truly stop and think that maybe he is capable of something greater. And when he started thinking that way, just look at what he achieved. He was able to stand up to Angelica, put her in her place, and get his toy back, all without this cape that he was under the impression was giving him powers. Because obviously that cape is just an old towel from a motel. The true power was him believing in himself. Sadly for Chuckie, though, that ability seems to be one that comes and goes. Him believing in himself, his confidence, his perception of himself, they're all things that he would end up struggling with, even in approaching his teenage years a decade later. The struggle with how he sees himself is nothing new to Chuckie, unfortunately. Nevertheless, this one showed us without a doubt just how much Chuckie is able to accomplish when he drops the disbelief in himself and starts thinking with a mindset that acknowledges the fact that he's just as competent as anybody else. The thing is about Chuckie, as we've established, he's not only one to advocate for those who go overlooked and one to stick to his convictions, but he's also genuinely capable. If he were to keep those same exact traits and combine them with a high level of confidence and a lot less fear of the unknown or unfamiliar, it's crazy to think about just how much the sky could be the limit for Chuckie. We saw here firsthand that he doesn't need magic or superpowers to stand up for himself or for anyone else. He just needs to believe in himself, which, in its own right, could be seen as a superpower to someone like Chuckie. When that's not really something you're naturally equipped to do, seeing somebody else have that kind of mindset can definitely seem like they're some sort of superhero who's capable of things that you yourself could never imagine doing. The sad truth here, though, is the fact that things like that don't just change over the course of 11 minutes. As impactful as an experience like this is for Chuckie on a personal note, it's not some kind of cure-all for the struggles that he carries as far as his own fears and self-perceptions are concerned. As, of course, this superhero mentality that he holds in the ending scene of this episode would really be one that doesn't stick around permanently. But, to be honest, that's for the best. Because if Chuckie really had just turned a new leaf here, it wouldn't have felt as authentic. Having his growth as a character be a slow burn that occurs across many seasons and movies in this series would be a decision that would shape Chuckie into one of the most relatable characters of all time. For anyone who grew up harboring a lot of fear or facing a difficult situation where their life was just different from everyone else around them, Chuckie was like a beacon of hope and a signal that every tough and scary phase in life doesn't last forever. The next episode we're going to check out is, without a doubt, an excellent example of that sentiment. It's an episode that I know for sure stuck with a lot of people, whether you held a similar fear, or if it just struck you to see Chuckie in such a terrifying situation where he's literally fearing for his life. That would be none other than The Inside Story. Now, this is yet another episode where we see Chuckie facing what he believes is a potential threat with fatal consequences. And on that note, it's absolutely crazy to contemplate just how many episodes of this show are in that same vein. So many episodes where Chuckie is left under the impression that this is his last day alive. Which is just so messed up to think about when we consider that he's just a 2-year-old boy and he already carries an insane amount of fear as it is. On top of that, this one shows even further just how dangerous it is to put a spiteful and vindictive little girl like Angelica anywhere near a gentle and naive kid like Chuckie. In the beginning of this one, we see the babies in the kitchen as Tommy climbs up on the counter and grabs hold of a watermelon, proceeding to throw it on the floor so he and his friends can eat it. As they do, Angelica catches sight of them and calls for an adult, which is where Grandpa Lou enters the picture. He catches them and tells them that they're too young to be eating watermelon, warning that they may swallow a seed and end up with a watermelon growing inside of them. And right when he says that, he pats Chuckie, who has a mouthful of watermelon, on the back, causing him to swallow it, including the seeds currently in his mouth. And of course, as Grandpa Lou walks away laughing, Chuckie starts to erupt into an internal panic.
You guys, I swallowed a seed.
As Tommy tries to put his mind at ease, saying that it's just a little seed, Chuckie loses his mind, saying that he's terrified it's going to start growing. And as luck would have it, Angelica is around the corner and listening to Chuckie's panic, plotting to antagonize him yet again. She storms right around the corner and goes up to him, saying that the seed in his stomach is going to grow into a watermelon and get bigger and bigger before it causes him to explode. Which, as you'd imagine, has Chuckie in full-blown meltdown mode. There is one thing, though, that I'm realizing is a very consistent theme in this series. A lot of times, Grandpa Lou is just as much of an instigator as Angelica, just with a lot less malicious intent. He'll say things meant in jest, like the watermelon seed comment, or what he said about Stu almost not making it into the Scouts because he wasn't potty trained in time, but he doesn't realize just how damaging that those statements are. Even more damaging than that, however, is realizing how often he jokingly says these things and someone like Angelica overhears it, deciding to take it upon herself to build upon that joke in a way that makes the babies literally fear for their lives, especially Chuckie. It hurts realizing how more often than not, he seems to be her target. You'd think that Tommy would have to put up with it more because he's related to her and has to be around her more often. However, it seems like if she's given the option to choose a particular person to target, it's always going to be Chuckie. Odds are, because she knows good and well that he's the one most likely to be deeply affected by whatever lie she decides to torment him with. Sure, they're all rather naive and gullible because they're babies, but the truth is, Chuckie is the one of the group who's most likely to be genuinely bothered on a subconscious level by her mocking and scheming. I mean, we already saw him having full-blown nightmares as a result of her teasing. If that wasn't already a clear example of just how much of an effect that Angelica has on him, I don't know what is. Her doing things like taking his toys and putting him down or making him fear for his life over eating a watermelon seed are just the icing on the cake, as well as the metaphorical cherry on top. As this episode continues, though, we see Tommy go into full-blown doctor mode as he tries to help Chuckie get the seed out. He suggests that Chuckie throw up, but that idea scares him just as much as having the seed still in there. All the while, down in the living room, Grandpa Lou, Stu, and Drew are watching a movie about the president having this little device inside of him and some scientists having to shrink down and go into his body to remove it. All the while, one of them is secretly planning to double cross the others and trigger the device to do not so good things and stuff. As luck would have it though, Angelica ends up walking past the TV and stopping to watch for a moment, getting inspired by this movie, especially that antagonist double-crossing everybody. She ends up walking her spiteful little self upstairs and telling Dr. Tommy that the only way she can get this watermelon seed out is by shrinking down and going inside of Chuckie, just like she saw in the movie. The babies all prepare for this journey to the center of Chuckie, as does Angelica, who secretly packs a bag of plant food in her bag behind their backs, clearly planning to double-cross them and feed the watermelon seed, hoping to make it grow. As they all shrink down and enter Chuckie through his nostrils, they wander down the cavernous, mucus-filled corridor and eventually reach his lungs, where they seem to find themselves at a dead end. However, that doesn't last long, as Tommy hypothesizes that they can just kind of push their way through the soft, bubbly lining of his inner lung chamber, which, crazily enough, works. But then this happens.
Wow! The bloodstream!
Yeah, you heard that right. These babies are straight up swimming in a river of the thick, icky red stuff. This literal toddler has it full-blown dripping down his face. And they all climb upon what I assume is a white blood cell, leisurely floating down the stream as if life were but a dream. But, honestly, guys, do I even need to break this one down? I mean, Angelica tormenting Chuckie was bad enough, but now they're playing make-believe that they're straight up swimming in his bloodstream? I mean, I get that they're doing a whole journey to the center of Chuckie gag, but also, is this not extremely messed up? These are literal babies in a children's cartoon, covered in blood. Yeah, I don't know, you guys. As someone who's squeamish, I'm ready to move past this part because I genuinely am not a fan of this portion of the episode. But yeah, as this one continues, we see them reaching a massive waterfall leading to an almost waterslide-like rapidly flowing stream of red waters ripping through Chuckie's veins like his blood pressure is through the roof. Which, now that I really take the time to stop and force myself to think about this part, might be a huge indicator of just how much stress that Chuckie is constantly under due to the fear that he carries all the time. I mean, he's straight up asleep right now while they're inside of him doing this, and even while sleeping, he's in a constant state of panic and elevation, causing his blood pressure to elevate as well. Eventually, they find themselves traveling through his heart, bouncing from chamber to chamber, and after a while, coming to a stop as they come across a massive Reptar lunchbox inside of Chuckie. They're all enamored by this thing, feeling like it's clearly gotta have the seed inside of it, but as they pop it open, Angelica has an immediate change of face, laughing at all of them and calling them suckers as she pulls out her umbrella and uses it to glide down to the seed safely. The babies all jump down after her, confused, and as soon as they land, it becomes pretty clear. That lunchbox is Chuckie's stomach. They land in his lunch and traverse through all the liquid, making their way to Angelica, who's currently in the middle of tending to the seed, which has its own, little island inside of him and everything. They confront her, asking her what she's doing, and this happens.
Maybe you don't, but I want to see Chuckie's tummy go kaboom!
Tommy tries his best to fight the watering can away from her, but it's no use. The watermelon starts growing vines and rapidly expanding inside of him. They all run, trying to escape the impending explosion, but before they can get out of the way, the watermelon bursts with a massive blast. However, back in the real world, outside of their imaginations, it turns out that this blast was actually just Chuckie burping up the watermelon seed. His friends all wake him up, telling him that he did it, but he's confused, asking why they aren't all little anymore. But they reveal that they never got little to begin with. They were about to engage the shrink ray when he burped the seed up out of nowhere, which, of course, means that all of this was just a very detailed dream that Chuckie was having. As this one comes to an end, though, Spike comes along and eats the seed off the ground, prompting the babies to prepare for their journey to the center of him next. Now, right out the gate, I'm gonna be honest, my friends. I am so relieved about this one being over with. I just don't do well with medical anything, specifically blood. It just makes me so uncomfortable. I mean, I can handle tattoos, but like needles for blood draws or IVs, any of that, it's a no-go for me. Like, I'll happily sob over the Mother's Day episode 10 times over before I tackle this episode again because it's genuinely that hard for me to get through. And, like, it's not even a bad episode by any means. It's just my own personal issue with the thought of Chuckie's friends literally flowing through his veins. Outside of my own personal issues with this one, though, it's absolutely enthralling to contemplate the fact that even when Chuckie hasn't a single clue that Angelica is plotting against him, he's still imagining it happening in his dreams. He legitimately dreamt about her betraying everyone and trying to get the seed to harm him. But in all reality, much like how his dream in Chuckie versus the Potty resembled the Green Mile with the chair and the executioner, he hasn't ever really seen anything that would prompt his brain to muster up this kind of scenario. I mean, he straight up didn't even see Angelica go and pack that bag of plant food. He had no idea that she was plotting against them or reason to suspect that other than his gut feeling. Furthermore, he didn't even see the movie that the grown-ups were watching that inspired Angelica to want to double-cross everyone and try to harm Chuckie. He literally just manufactured all of this in his mind on his own. And it was all surprisingly accurate to Angelica's real-world intentions. By all means, it says a lot about Angelica and how easy that she can be read, especially for Chuckie at this point, with him having experienced her torment continuously over and over again now. But on top of that, it says a great deal more about Chuckie and the way that he sees the world around him, and his ability to perceive danger and pick out someone with an ulterior motive. He's learned at this point that there are certain people who don't have his best interest at heart. He's learned that some people will go out of their way to target you and harm you. And honestly, 2 is an awfully early age to have to learn that lesson in the name of self-preservation. As the dominoes fall, what it really boils down to is that he knows without any doubt that he can't trust Angelica, that he's not safe around Angelica, and that for not even a moment does she have his best interest at heart. Honestly, though, when we hone in on the implications as far as they reach outside of Angelica, his outlook just turns more and more bleak. All of this just really shows how deep Chuckie's fears go. He was petrified to his core over the idea of this watermelon growing inside of him and causing him to explode. Even deeper than that, though, he was terrified of his friends failing in that mission and Angelica being successful in her double crossing. He was scared at this point for not only his own life, but also his friends, as they're trapped inside of him experiencing this watermelon explosion. At the end of the trail, though, possibly the most chilling of it all is when we consider the fact that even though her attempts to mess with Chuckie, either psychologically, physically, or both, are usually unsuccessful in their ultimate intended outcome, the damage is still done regardless. Even if she doesn't complete the task that she set out to complete in particular, or if she ends up getting her own comeuppance along the way, Chuckie still ends up walking away with some sort of psychological damage due to the fact that he's had to face so much negativity, mental strife, and overall hardship as a result of this little girl who isn't even related to him, tormenting him every single chance that she gets, simply because she gets enjoyment out of it. What's possibly the most defeating detail of all this, though, is the fact that time and time again, it's always Chuckie who ends up being the target when it comes to Angelica. And it's not even rooted in her having some childish crush on him or anything like that. It's genuinely rooted in a place of cruelty and her looking down on him. not only for his age, but also his general demeanor and who he is as a person. He's the kind of human that she'll never take seriously because she was raised by people like Charlotte and Drew, who by default look down on literally anyone who isn't cutthroat and intentionally trampling everybody that's unfortunate enough to stumble into their sights. It feels like with Chuckie, her urge to target him and go out of her way to make him endure as much torment as she possibly can is rooted in a primal urge where, on an internal level, she sees herself as the alpha, always above him in every context. Which, really, the rippling effects of that are just endless. It builds up her ego in a very dangerous way. Every time she gets the opportunity to terrorize him and he ends up stricken by it, she gets joy and it builds her up more and more. Meanwhile, for Chuckie, on the other hand, it really just pushes him down further and further in a very defeating and excruciating manner. It takes his already broken, fearful outlook on life and gives it a lot of justification. A lot of times, he walks around in fear, feeling like he's being watched, stalked, or targeted. And not even because of Angelica per se. However, she's the one thing that actually makes those fears valid and worthy of holding on to because he knows she's always lurking and ready to pounce as soon as he shows any vulnerability for her to exploit. With all that being said, though, as sad and hard as these times are to process from a Chuckie aspect, they're crucial. Because it's the sad moments where you authentically feel for Chuckie due to him being targeted that make his character progression later on so much more sweet to take in. Whereas people like Angelica stay in the same exact rut, being big-headed and not caring for anybody around them, ripping apart whoever they need to in order to get ahead in life and struggling to develop real connections as a result, people like Chuckie grow. They grow from their experiences, from the hardships, and for every time that Angelica puts him down and makes him question himself further, sure, it may break him more and make him question himself, but at the end of it all, he will be the one who actually makes a change in this life and ends up experiencing positive turns in life as a result. Because when you're constantly on your toes and running from someone with negative intentions of tormenting you, it's impossible to stay in a rut. You have to adapt because you don't have a choice. You have to thrive and you have to outsmart them. Until that day comes, though, we can be thankful that these are all just babies and toddlers. Because, in all seriousness, Angelica being a 3-year-old, she really, truly isn't very capable. She doesn't think her plot's all the way through, and she's prone to falling into situations where she ends up getting a taste of her own medicine, whether someone intended to dish it out to her or not. Or even times when she ends up dishing it out to herself, ironically enough. One of the greatest examples of that we could ever see in the entirety of Season 2 of Rugrats would be in an episode called Chuckie Loses His Glasses. So, Chuckie Loses His Glasses takes place on a gloomy, dark, and stormy day. As rain pours down outside of Tommy's house, Angelica stomps her way through the puddles outside, having just shown up with her dad. All the while, Tommy and his friends watch through the window, with Chuckie in particular being nervous that Angelica is mad at him over a little mishap with him eating a few of her crayons last time she was over. And sadly, he's right to be anxious about it, as Angelica definitely is pretty pissed off at him about it still. And on top of that, she pretty quickly devises a nasty plan to get some revenge on him. Lil suggests that they play hide and seek around the house because it's so rainy outside, and though Chuckie is just petrified by the idea, Angelica doesn't give him much of a choice. With a sly, evil grin across her face, she says that not only are they gonna play hide and seek, but she's gonna be the one to decide who's it. And of course, she chooses Chuckie to be it. At first, that seems to be the extent of her plan. He's clearly scared at the thought of playing hide and seek in general, hiding behind the curtains as soon as the idea is brought up, but being it specifically is a nightmare for him in particular. I mean, you gotta think about it like this. He's the kid who's always carrying a heavy load of fear. Him being alone, walking through someone else's house, searching for his hiding friends, it's really just setting up the perfect recipe for Angelica to terrorize him further. However, her plan is genuinely a lot more maniacal than that. Chuckie being her target isn't simply a matter of putting him in a position where he's terrified as he searches around the house by himself, vulnerable to be preyed upon from wherever she chooses to lurk. As the game starts out, Chuckie begins to count, and Angelica stops him, saying that he needs to take off his glasses because he can still see them. Which he agrees to, but only while he's counting. He starts the count again, and all of his friends run off, finding different hiding spots around the house. All the while, Angelica decides to sneak up behind Chuckie and take his glasses, leaving him not only wandering in a house that isn't his own, but also pretty much blind, unable to see anything that's even just a few feet away from him. Naturally, this increases his fear tenfold. With him being so scared of everything, his mind is the type to look at the unknown, or something that it can't properly make out, and immediately jump to an endless list of fears over what that thing could possibly be, not taking a moment to stop and consider that maybe whatever terrifying thing that he's encountering could just be a regular, everyday household object. It's truly interesting because this really does say a lot about Chuckie's fears that he carries on a subconscious level. It's one thing for him to be able to see something and worry that it's a threat. It's another thing for him to have previously seen something that could have been a threat and be so affected by it that he starts to have nightmares about it. However, Chuckie's brain operates in this zone where it panics and spirals, immediately filling any gaps in perception with something terrifying. Again, we can't help but wonder where this is rooted, because usually people who carry this level of fear do so out of a place of trauma. Usually they've been through something that scarred them so much that it changes their entire outlook on life. Chuckie, though, we'll see throughout this entire series that he's kind of always been this way. Even in his early infancy, before things spiraled out and his family had to face tremendous loss. On top of all that, though, again, this one shows just how cruel that Angelica is. Like, I understand being upset about having some of your crayons eaten. Those are her crayons, and for Chuckie to eat them is not only a little weird, but it's rather insensitive to her. But one key detail we really do need to keep in mind here is that Angelica's parents are filthy rich. Of course, that doesn't mean people can just eat her art supplies and break her toys because they can replace them easily. But, like, they could buy her 100 boxes of crayons and not bat an eye. Her anger boiling over into a spiteful quest for vengeance is absolutely not justified over 2 crayons. Especially considering that we all know without a shadow of a doubt that Chuckie said he was sorry already. To be fair, they don't show it, so I guess we don't have, like, full confirmation, but just watch. Every single time that Chuckie does someone wrong and hurts their feelings by accident, he ends up saying he's sorry. That's usually his default response. An apology should be enough to cover the emotional distress of eating 2 crayons. Especially when it's not like Angelica saved up her allowance for a month to buy those crayons. or like they were her great-great-great-grandmother's special crayons or something like that. They're not some irreplaceable item. By all means, her feelings can be upset over crayons, that's definitely understandable, but you gotta admit, it's like an eye for a life kind of justice system that Angelica's promoting here. As this one continues though, we see Chuckie walking around the house and being shocked to his core by the things that he sees while he isn't wearing his glasses. He interprets the playpen as a giant mouth with sharp teeth that want to bite him. He sees multiple houseplants as aliens, and he perceives all the furniture in the house as these creepy clowns and monsters that are trying to get him. As he stands there, helpless and panicking at the entire world surrounding him though, thankfully there ends up being one furry, sweet light at the end of the tunnel to help him out. At first, he thinks it's another crazy-looking alien attacking him, but when it steps closer to him, he's relieved to see that it's actually none other than Spike, Tommy's dog. Chuckie climbs atop Spike's back and rides him like a horse, asking him to take him to Tommy, but sadly, Spike ends up being distracted by none other than Angelica, standing nearby with his bone. She throws it outside, and as Spike sprints out into the rain to get it, Chuckie holds on for dear life, obviously unprepared for the abrupt change of pace. And just like the evil, vindictive little jerk that she is, she stands there letting out a villainous laugh.
Loud out, Spike! Too bad you don't have these!
As Angelica wears Chuckie's glasses, she spins and laughs, thinking it's hilarious just how blind she is when she wears them. But if you thought that was bad, I'll tell you right now, her putting Chuckie through all this literally looks like a regular happy day on Sesame Street in comparison to what this devilishly nefarious child does next. At this point, all of Chuckie's friends are concerned because he's just gone and he never found them. So they decide that it's time to come out of hiding and make sure that he's okay. And when they do, Angelica approaches them holding Chuckie's glasses and sporting a sad look on her face, saying that they're all they have left of Chuckie.
Did you see him? No, told you. He's dead. Gone for good.
Okay, now, I'm going to be completely open and honest with you guys. When I initially contemplated making this series, I was a little worried that a show like Rugrats wasn't really dark enough to look at under a morbid lens. I mean, it's a cartoon about babies, and sure, it had its fair share of sad moments, but how dark could it truly get, right? Well, considering we're 5 episodes deep and we've already seen these kids swimming in a river of Chuckie's blood, seen Chuckie forced to stand idly by while his best friend's mom destroys his pet between her fingers, seen Angelica tell Chuckie's friends that he's straight up dead, and seen her maliciously target him 4 out of 5 episodes so far, it's safe to say that those initial worries have been long laid to rest. I mean, we're only right about halfway into this video, and things have gone practically darker than we've ever seen in the dark side of Hey Arnold. I mean, it was one thing for Helga to tell Arnold that he had 24 hours left to live because Harold was gonna pummel him, but it's a completely different thing for Angelica, the older kid, to straight up tell these babies that their friend is already long gone and immediately just turn around and laugh and play like it's no big deal. And, I mean, you can stop and say that odds are they might not believe her because they know she's full of it, but in all reality, that doesn't negate the awful, manipulative, and evil intentions behind her actions here. And furthermore, Phil and Lil straight up believe her. Phil goes right into being heartbroken that he'll never see Chuckie again. Meanwhile, Lil goes right into wondering if she can have all of his toys, which that alone really does need to be picked apart. Phil and Lil are so much alike, but just so different at the same time. I honestly feel like usually Lil is the more emotionally driven one, so seeing Phil be the one to show the most sadness here is quite the sight to take in. Especially when we really contemplate the kind of relationship that Phil and Chuckie would end up having as they approach their teenage years and all grown up. It's honestly a pretty special one that feels like it serves a really important purpose in Chuckie's life, and I'm excited for us to reach that point in his story. In a way, seeing Phil being so torn up at the idea makes for a really strong precursor to that arc in their relationship. As far as Lil goes, though, her being as nonchalant about it as Angelica is really just so jarring. She doesn't even have a care for Chuckie or his well-being. She just goes right into thinking about what she can get out of it. In all reality, though, that trait in and of itself isn't all too surprising because if we're being honest, if it's not Lil acting that way, it's usually Phil. One of them usually tends to be the more brazen one, while the other is behaving a little more emotionally aware. Except, of course, in the times when they're both hyper-emotional and crying into each other's arms. As far as the rest of the situation goes, though, thankfully, Tommy doesn't buy into Angelica's lie for even a second, knowing good and well that Chuckie wouldn't just disappear out of nowhere with only a single trace left behind. As Angelica runs off wearing Chuckie's glasses and spinning around in them, we cut back to Chuckie, who sits outside in the rain, confused as to why Spike would have taken him out in the backyard to look for Tommy. And at that, he decides to go off on his own, wandering through the yard, confusing some bushes nearby for his friends, striking up a conversation with them. Meanwhile, back in the house, as his friends search for them, they end up coming upon Angelica, still wearing the glasses, but now looking rather nauseous and sounding like she's about to hurl. She gives the glasses over to the babies, regretting her life choices, and when Tommy holds them in his hands, he comes up with the idea to put Chuckie's glasses on, thinking that'll lead them to him somehow.
This must be what Chuckie sees. No wonder he's so scared.
Now, to be completely frank, this is such a small moment that you can almost blink and miss. However, when you really let this one simmer for a bit, it hits extra hard for Tommy to actually recognize that Chuckie perceives the world in a way that's genuinely terrifying. It's sort of like a validation in a metaphorical sense. Like saying that if Tommy had to walk in Chuckie's shoes, odds are he'd be just as scared as he is. And I feel like that's something that applies in every facet of his life. Not just walking around in a half-blind context. I mean, if Tommy had been through the kind of things that Chuckie had already lived through by his age, odds are he'd be a lot different. Especially if he was already predisposed to paranoia like Chuckie is. This especially feels like an important moment because a lot of times Tommy really just doesn't come across as all too understanding of Chuckie. There are so many instances where Chuckie voices a concern or points out a fear and Tommy just completely disregards it, not seeing for even a moment where his concern could be potentially valid. And in a way, this almost feels like it's acknowledging those times and recognizing that Tommy may have been able to have a better understanding if he had thought about the situation from Chuckie's point of view. At that though, as we wind down to the end of this episode, Chuckie, having realized that he's not talking to his friends, he's talking to a bush, goes on walking further, hoping he can find his glasses, when all of a sudden, he hears a crunching sound coming from under his foot.
No! My eyes! Now I'm never gonna see again!
Chuckie rolls on the ground, sobbing his eyes out and panicking, thinking that he's lost his glasses forever and that he'll have to go the rest of his life never seeing again. But as he sits there in despair, from inside the house, his friends hear him sobbing and they come running, happy to rescue him and return his glasses, restoring his ability to see. He tells them all about everything that he's been through, saying that he was so sure that he broke his glasses. But as it turns out, those were actually Grandpa Lou's glasses that he stepped on, sadly leaving him blind as a bat. As Chuckie and his friends reconvene, however, they ask about how he handles those glasses, saying that when they wear them, they get all dizzy and feel like they're gonna throw up. And before Chuckie can even answer that question, we see Angelica stumble around the corner, looking sick as a dog, and finally getting her comeuppance as she walks right up to her dad and just barfs all over his new sweater due to her getting dizzy after playing with Chuckie's glasses. Now, this is one of those episodes that, as far as Angelica is concerned at least, it brings so much joy because she gets her fair share of karma, she learns a lesson, and along the way, Chuckie doesn't even have to lift a finger. Sure, he may have to endure some trauma on Angelica's behalf, but admittedly, it's rather sweet that she ends up getting a taste of her own medicine without him having to even really think about it. I mean, that alone really just highlights the power of letting things be water off the duck's back. When someone wrongs you, oftentimes you don't really need to take revenge into your own hands, because a lot of times in life, karma has your back and will do its thing if you just stay in your lane and don't react to the person that's targeting you. In a lot of ways, Chuckie is an excellent embodiment of that. He's never really one to feel the need to pursue any type of vengeance against someone who's wronged him, because he really doesn't have a mean bone in his body. He's too kind-hearted and gentle to want to wrong even someone who tried to wrong him first. However, one of the most destructive aspects of Chuckie's life is the fact that even if he isn't being targeted by Angelica or having to be the one at the very bottom of the baby totem pole, odds are he's still having something terrible happen to him. Oftentimes not even done by someone who was meaning to harm him. Because ultimately, he's just kind of danger prone. Which, in a way, makes the fact that he gets targeted a lot worse, but I digress. Quite possibly one of the saddest times that we've seen Chuckie being the victim of circumstance and getting the short end of the stick in life with really no one to blame, not for directly targeting him at least, would be in the episode known as Chuckie Gets Skunked. Now, this episode is a bit of a strange one to take in from top to bottom. It starts out with Stu, Grandpa Lou, and oddly enough, Chaz Finster lurking around Stu's backyard late at night as they hunt for a skunk that's been wandering around back there. And as soon as they find it, they all scream for their lives and turn tail, running to retreat into the house. Once inside, we get this minor interaction between the three of them and Dee Dee, who doesn't really get why they're trying to run the skunk off, claiming that it has just as much a right to be there as they do, to which Grandpa Lou responds by going off about how much of a menace that skunks are. He starts talking about how he remembers back in 1906 as he delves off into one of his old stories, but honestly, though this one is about Chuckie, I need to stop and take a moment to put the spotlight on Grandpa Lou again. We've seen him acting a fool a few times now, just in these few episodes alone, but this moment here really feels so much more telling about his character on a grander scheme. He talks about the year 1906, saying that he remembers it clear as day. which would imply that he was not only alive by then, but old enough to form very distinct memories. And this show takes place in the 1990s. So, like, let's say he was born in the year 1900 and he was 6 years old in 1906. That would make Grandpa Lou in his 90s throughout this era of the show. And in the 2000s, when the show was still going on, that would have made him over 100 years old. And in All Grown Up, since it was a decade in the future, he was 110 and still up and kicking like he was 20 years prior in the 90s? Now, obviously, it's a cartoon and they aren't aging these characters as time goes on in the way that I'm laying out there. If that were the case, Tommy would have been 10 years old in the 2000s episodes of Rugrats and 20 years old in All Grown Up. It's kind of like how any instance of SpongeBob's license that we've ever seen in the show says that he was born in 1986. That would make him 40 years old today, but the show doesn't age him into a 40-year-old. But considering that, I feel like moments like these could have potentially pointed to Grandpa Lou being a pathological liar of sorts. He tells stories like this all the time that are completely impossible. Like saying he used to walk 15 miles to the bus when he was only 15 days old or whatever. On top of that, he's awful with accountability. Like how he ran away from the skunk in fear too, but accuses Stu and Chaz of being cowards for running.
These two panicked is what happened. Pure and simple fear.
All the while saying that his running was justified because fear is a natural survival instinct, refusing to acknowledge the hypocrisy and judging them when he turned and ran at the same time that they did. That even if someone did call him on his lies and his stories being bogus, odds are he wouldn't admit it. If not because he truly believes the lie on a pathological level, then simply because he's too stubborn to admit when he's been caught. Again, I know this one is about Chuckie, but with this being the first entry in the series, I can't help but take in all these characters just ripe for analysis and contemplate just how much there is to truly point out about how deep their characters go. I have a feeling that Grandpa Lou's deep dive is going to be a bit of a controversial one. Because he's one of those characters that either you love and defend to the end of the earth no matter what he does or how many lies he tells, or you see his flaws and you're not afraid to call them out even though it could be seen as
disrespecting your cartoon elders.
So as Lou leads the rest of the group to the kitchen, warning them about how dangerous skunks are, Tommy and Chuckie stand in their playpen looking outside, just fascinated by this creature, thinking it's possibly some sort of weird kitty.
He looked kinda nice, like a stuffed animal that moves. Come on, let's go play with him.
Now, what happens next is potentially one of the most absurd and brain-dead moments that I've seen in the entirety of this show. And I'm not talking about the babies. No, I'm talking about the adults. As Chaz, Dee Dee, Stu, and Lou all sit around the table discussing skunks and whether or not they're a laughing matter, Tommy and Chuckie are easily able to straight up just sprint past them in the kitchen, not even sneaking or anything, and just go right out the back door to find the skunk. Because not a single one of these four adults bothered to close the back door when they came in, as they were running from a skunk in the backyard. Like, is that not just the dumbest thing that you've seen so far? There's a skunk in their backyard, and they just leave the back door wide open and unattended? Pretty much just inviting the skunk inside of their house? Skunks will happily investigate open doors, especially if there's food scraps to be found inside, which there is, because this is the kitchen and they definitely have a garbage can in there. But also, pet food attracts them as well. And Spike's bowl stays in the kitchen. Honestly, it feels foolish to leave your back door wide open at night in the first place because any critter could find its way into your house. But doing that when you actively know and have a confirmation that a skunk of all things is wandering in your backyard, it just feels so incredibly careless and negligent. Interestingly enough, though, the skunk wasn't even the real worry here. It didn't come over to investigate the open door at all. Instead, the worry was the literal toddlers who were able to easily walk out the door and wander into the dark backyard where the skunk is already in defense mode because not a single adult here is paying attention on their way in from messing with it. By all means, I get that they could let their guard down a bit due to the fact that their kids were in the playpen and they assumed they wouldn't get out. But even then, it takes a huge level of obliviousness to not even notice when they do escape and full-blown run right past you and out the back door in the middle of the night. Like, they know Tommy has a tendency to escape his playpen too. Literally every single day he gets out of that thing. You'd think at some point they'd deem it useless and just ditch the big eyesore and just kind of baby-proof their house and keep a closer eye on him. But no, why baby-proof when you could just put all of your faith in a flimsy 1.5 foot tall wooden playpen that they could easily just crawl under? I don't know. For me personally, I'm not going to sit here and say you can't have any interests, hobbies, or even conversations with other adults because your eyes need to be glued on your kids at all times. But what I am trying to say is they should A, pay at least a little more attention, and B, close the stinking back door when you come inside in the middle of the night and there's a skunk on the other side of it. On top of that though, I will admit that this is frustrating on a personal level, because my original intention was to point out how unlucky Chuckie can tend to be, just happening to be at the wrong place at the wrong time and seemingly having the universe choosing him to dump all over. However, taking the time to realize that all this is really the fault of the parents who didn't pay close enough attention makes this point a lot harder to rationalize and justify. It's hard to sit here and say Chuckie was in the wrong place at the wrong time when, it's not exactly his fault that he ended up in that place to begin with. Sure, he and Tommy made the choice to go outside and try to play with the skunk, but also they're literally 1 and 2 years old. They don't know any better, and the people who do know better, who should be in charge of making sure these toddlers don't escape into the dark, skunk-infested backyard, are busy listening to an apparently 120-year-old man preach to them about the dangers of skunks. I mean, if that's not the definition of dropping the ball as a parent, I don't know what is. Now, I'm sure you can imagine exactly what happens next. While the adults sit there continuing their pointless debate, Tommy and Chuckie wander through the backyard trying to find the skunk. They approach the bushes where they last saw it, but Chuckie refuses to go in, saying that it's way too dark and terrifying for him. Thankfully, Tommy says that he doesn't have to go and that he'll just go in and check by himself. And as Tommy traverses deeper and deeper into the depths of the bush, he eventually gets stuck on a branch, causing him to take way longer than he expected to. And due to that delay, Chuckie, still waiting outside the bush, starts to pace and panic, calling for Tommy and not getting a response. As per usual for poor Chuckie, his brain starts to spiral and freak out, thinking that he might never see Tommy again, and struggling with whether he should go in after him, when all of a sudden this happens. As Tommy rushes to his best friend, the adults finally realize that the kids got outside, having been alerted by Chuckie's screams of terror. And when they find him, they're just revolted by the disgusting stench radiating from him, a result of being sprayed by a skunk due to their negligence. Now, I don't know if you've ever smelled skunk spray before, but it's literally messed up. When I first moved to a rural area a few years back, someone hit a skunk on the highway right outside of my house, and it was just atrocious. The smell spread across like an entire half-mile radius, and even though I have a relatively long driveway, it made my whole house stink with just the most gnarly, choking odor. It's like garlicky BO and rotten eggs had a monstrosity of a child and put it in a cradle made of burnt rubber. And I'm not even exaggerating. It's legitimately that bad. Please, if you've ever smelled skunk spray before, please just answer one question down in the comments. Did I hit the nail on the head? If not, what did it smell like to you? And if you say weed, I'll know you're lying, because that definitely does not smell like stomach bile and an overflowing porta potty roasting under the sweltering sun on a sandy beach on a summer's day. So from there, though, we cut to the next day where Tommy is standing in his playpen with Phil and Lil, telling them all about that horrific experience the day prior. All of a sudden, though, the doorbell rings and we see a situation play out that might just give us a little bit of deja vu. Dee Dee goes up and opens the door to find Chaz holding Chuckie out and away from him, pretty elevated and saying that he just doesn't know what to do and that he's run out of ideas to get rid of the smell. Just like she did with the potty training situation, Dee Dee does her best to calm Chaz down and put his mind at ease, saying that she's going to help him get to the bottom of this issue. He goes to put Chuckie down in the playpen with his friends, however, Dee Dee stops him, saying that it'd probably be best if they set him over on the couch away from the other kids instead. And as the two of them walk into the kitchen to do some research on getting rid of skunk spray, Chuckie is left sitting there sad and lonely, feeling like nobody likes him anymore. Of course, as soon as the adults are out of the room, Tommy opens up the playpen and runs up to Chuckie, stopping just short of him due to the ripe stench that's overwhelming his nostrils.
This is the most terriblest thing that's ever happened. Nobody wants to be around me. Even I don't want to be around me.
Tommy asks him how long he's gonna have to stay skunked, and Chuckie says that's the worst part. He's afraid it's gonna be like this forever. And honestly, if your heart doesn't break for Chuckie at this moment, then it must be made of stone. The implications behind what he's saying here are just so gruesome. This 2-year-old feeling like he doesn't even want to be around himself and worrying that he's gonna feel this way forever is the kind of distressing feelings that you usually hear from someone dangerously close to wishing they didn't exist anymore. Not a 2-year-old. And to be honest, I hate to spoil episodes to come, but eventually we would actually see an episode where Chuckie legitimately wishes that he didn't exist. And he ends up seeing the reality of that wish. To be honest, seeing Chuckie facing this kind of situation while keeping that episode in mind, it really makes you wonder about his mental health, even at this young of an age. It's truly frustrating because I've seen comments on previous videos of mine saying that you can't psychoanalyze a child, and honestly, that's not only total BS because child psychologists are a literal thing, but like when you see a fictional 2-year-old in a cartoon known for being full of all sorts of subcontext hidden in plain sight, be it jokes or morbid moments, what are we supposed to think? This is the same cartoon that had a movie where Tommy threatens to pour banana baby food all over his baby brother and throw him to monkeys in a super dramatic moment. This is the same cartoon where Tommy gets kidnapped by 2 criminals and one of them is armed in his coat pocket with a banana. And those are just 2 examples. Opinions on psychoanalyzing children aside, it's no secret that this show takes morbid subjects and moments and it turns them into a baby-centered, relatively child-friendly moment. However, the morbid subcontext is still there. They can imply a threat even though it's just bananas. They don't have to directly say the morbid part out loud for it to be analyzed as morbid. I mean, that's literally the entire point of my channel. looking into the morbid part that's not necessarily said out loud in all of our favorite childhood cartoons. So, with that being said, whether it be full-blown depression, ideation, or just him having a crisis over being segregated from everyone that he loves, it's clear that there's something deeper going on here. Something within his mental health is spiraling out, understandably. He's confused. He's frustrated. And most of all, none of this is even his fault. He just wanted to stand there and wait while Tommy found the skunk. And instead, the skunk found him and decided that he was the target. And I mean, keep in mind, aside from Dee Dee, Chuckie is the one person here not trying to find the skunk. Chaz, Stu, and Lou all wanted to find it and get rid of it. Tommy wanted to find it and play with it, going as far as crawling into the bushes, hoping it was in there. Chuckie was just kind of going along for the ride. Honestly, Chuckie of all people is the least deserving of what happened, and it's just such a defeating twist of fate that it would be him of all people who has to face the consequences of running into the skunk. What comes next, though, is even more grim. Over in the kitchen, Chaz sits with Stu, Lou, and Dee Dee, telling them that he's tried bathing Chuckie in tomato juice, tomato paste, and even just using soap and water. 6 times over. Scrubbing until his skin started to come off. Which I definitely don't need to point out to you guys why that's problematic. And, of course, none of it worked. Chuckie and the entire rest of their house still smells rampant with the lingering stench of skunk spray. Chaz says that he's completely out of options and he just doesn't know what to do. And in response, Grandpa Lou says there's only one thing they can do, as he tells them to grab shovels and head to the backyard.
It's all over. I guess they're just gonna bury me. They're probably just making you a hole to live in. Sorry you have to live outside.
Now, from the top here, it's pretty messed up for Chuckie's friends to assume that the adults would make Chuckie live in a hole in the backyard from now on. But what's even more bleak than that is the fact that Chuckie goes astronomically farther in his assumptions. He just assumed that they were going to completely bury him in the backyard. I mean, what does it say about Chuckie that while the rest of his friends went to him literally living in a hole, he went right to the thought of being buried alive? And furthermore, what else does it say about him to consider that he wasn't even scared at the thought of being buried alive? Or even against it? When he said that's what they were probably doing, he seemed like he was shockingly okay with it. Like, this is just his natural progression and what needs to happen to him now that he's done being around himself and nobody else wants to be around him. It's incredibly harrowing to stop and realize that he's not even wanting to put up a fight here. Almost like he wants this. Again, this could be indicative of Chuckie, even at this young of an age, facing a mental health crisis. Or even struggling with depression. As Chuckie's struggle continues, though, he ends up willfully going along with whatever the hole is for, not putting up any fight at all, only to find out that they're just giving him a mud bath. An old and ineffective trick that Grandpa Lou got from some of his buddies. After that doesn't work, Stu gets the bright idea to give Chuckie a nice bath with some of Dee Dee's $150 per ounce perfume, but unfortunately that just makes him smell like Pepe Le Pew. Having run fresh out of ideas, they just set Chuckie on the kitchen floor with a fan pointed at him, hoping some ventilation will do him some good. While they continue brainstorming ideas, eventually Dee Dee's parents, Boris and Minka, show up, having brought with them a pot of cold beef stew for dinner.
Tastes like glue, but what can I say? I've been eating it for 60 years.
Now, it seems like Grandpa Lou is the only person in the house who genuinely appreciates the flavor of this stew. Everyone else thinks it's pretty gnarly, including Stu, who Tommy overheard say that this stuff could clean a grease stain off of the driveway. By that logic, he thinks that if they could give Chuckie a bath in this stew, it might solve his problem. And just like that, while all of the adults are in a different room, Chuckie climbs his way up onto the table and plops himself right into the pot of stew, covering himself from head to toe in the stuff as he soaks in it for a bit. Of course, with his friends surrounding him and splashing in the soup for fun. Before long, though, all of the adults walk into the kitchen again, just taken back to find the kids all playing in the soup while Chuckie's entire body, including his clothes, are submerged in it. However, despite dinner being ruined, they're all pleasantly surprised to find that Chuckie smells just fine, no longer carrying that lingering stench of skunk wherever he goes. To celebrate, they decide to go pick up some pizzas for dinner instead, and as Chaz and Stu head out to get them, something truly shocking happens. Grandpa Lou finds himself standing alone in the kitchen with a spoon and an untamable sense of curiosity.
Say, tastes even better than usual.
Yeah, we both just saw that. This old man just stuck a spoon in a pot of cold beef stew that a 2-year-old had been sitting in, and he ate it happily. This moment, you guys, it's just beyond grotesque in too many ways. I can't even begin to scratch the surface on how incredibly messed up this whole scenario is. From top to bottom, it's just such a deplorable thing for someone to do. It really does make me question Grandpa Lou even more, because his behavior here is honestly concerning. It's disgusting, and frankly, it's shocking that not only would he have the audacity to take a bite, but also to say that it's better than normal, implying he likes the flavor that Chuckie sitting and marinating in it added? The nasty, disgusting skunk flavor? The skin cells? The hair that was probably on his clothes or that fell off of his head? And, I mean, let's just be honest, there are fully grown adults who struggle to wipe properly. As disgusting as that is, Chuckie is a freshly potty-trained 2-year-old. He's still accident-prone and everything. I'm just appalled to my core over the fact that Grandpa Lou would do something like this, and honestly, it's even more odd that he went out of his way to make sure that none of the adults were around when he did it. I really can't imagine that Chaz would be all too comfortable with this elderly man eating the soup that his son was legitimately sitting in. This is one of those scenarios that literally makes you never look at Grandpa Lou and everything that he does the same way again. I mean, I always just thought he was kind of a decent and loving grandpa when I watched this show as a kid, but being an adult and looking back on this, he's got some really questionable moments that kind of set off some red flags if I'm being truly honest. Like, I'm not going to sit here and say he's got like creepy intentions or anything like that, but I will say it's definitely concerning that he would not only take that bite after what happened, but specifically do so when no other adults were around to witness it. That's really just so alarming. But going on with this one though, as it comes to an end, we see the babies celebrating the fact that Chuckie smells normal again, and while they play in their playpen, Stu and Chaz step outside to go get the pizza, only to be approached by the same skunk that sprayed Chuckie. Presumably to be sprayed by themselves, judging by the sound of their screams as the episode fades out. And while the ending here is a silly one, it needs to be said that the entirety of this episode is one that can easily be seen at face value as nothing serious. I mean, I don't know about you, but when I saw this as a kid, I just thought about it as one funny episode where Chuckie gets skunked and they struggle to figure out a solution for the smell. It's a simple and straightforward premise. But when we stop and consider the facts here, it becomes so much more than that. I mean, Chuckie's just an innocent kid who has nothing but good intentions and a shy disposition. The fact that he, the most gentle and well-meaning kid in the entire show, would end up being put in a situation where he's ostracized and left feeling like nobody wants to be around him anymore is just so grim. He's already carrying so much strife and trouble as it is. For him to be the subject of something like this just feels like the show's writers dogpiling on Chuckie in a way. Like them looking at each other and asking, how could we take our saddest and most troubled character in the whole show and make him even more miserable and lonely? I mean, at least if it was Phil and Lil who got skunked, they'd probably be running around happy and enjoying the stink. Chuckie, on the other hand, was the perfect candidate to sign up for complete and utter misery. And honestly, that kind of feels like that was the goal here. To put Chuckie in the saddest situation that they possibly could. What makes all of this even harder, though, is the fact that Chuckie is already misunderstood as it is. Among his friend group, nobody knows what it's like to go through the things that he's gone through. He's the oldest. He's the only one being raised by a single parent. He's the only one who carries a constant state of fear and paranoia. Seeing him have to deal with being cast aside purposefully on top of that is just such a somber sight to behold. As far as Chuckie being misunderstood goes, one of the greatest examples that I can think of to support that comes in the form of the next episode that we're going to check out. It's more or less seen as a wholesome and positive episode, but as is the case with a lot of these episodes, there's a pretty grim and haunting truth hidden in the subcontext. Next up, we're checking out the episode My Friend Barney. So as we begin this episode, we see Tommy, Phil, and Lil all hanging out in the playpen, just bored out of their minds. They can't think of anything to do, and they see every single toy as just plain boring. As we've seen time and time again, though, the doorbell rings, and Dee Dee answers it to find none other than Chaz and Chuckie. As Chaz tells her all about how he's relabeling his self-help VHS tape collection, asking if she has any spare VHS tape labels that he can use, Chuckie goes into the living room to tell his friends all about what he's got going on.
Hi, guys. Want to know what I've been up to? No.
Okay, we need to pause for just a moment here before we get into the actual meat and potatoes of this episode and acknowledge that Tommy, Phil, and Lil are just acting pretty out of character here. Granted, the writers are going out of their way to stress to the umpteenth degree that the three are struggling to be positive and use their imaginations today. It just feels so unnatural for Chuckie to show up and for the three of them to be such pessimistic jerks to him. Like, they don't even ask how he's doing, let alone say hello to him. And when he shows some positivity, they return the favor by throwing it in his face. It sets a really sad tone from the start of this episode, and I guess above all else, it's meant to really underline the point that Chuckie has nothing but happiness and positivity flowing through him from the very start. And that positivity and his imaginative nature was immediately met with apathy and a general uncaring demeanor from his own best friend. However, when Chuckie tells them that he made a new friend, they all perk up and get excited to hear about it, happy that there's finally something new for them to focus on. Chuckie says that his new friend's name is Barney and that he's probably the neatest kid that he's ever met. He's really smart, brave, and adventurous. He tells them about how they've been exploring under his dad's bed and in the crawl space under the front porch.
Were you scared? Nah, with Barney around, I'm not afraid of anything.
Of course, the babies are naturally mind blown and infatuated at the idea of this kid, asking Chuckie what he looks like. A question that Chuckie struggles to answer plainly, just defaulting to saying that he kind of looks like Chuckie himself. And when they ask if Barney can come over to play, Chuckie says that he can't because he lives in a faraway castle and he's not allowed to cross the street. And neither are his parents, so they can't just bring him here. Chuckie says that Barney is only able to come over to his house. And almost like clockwork, right when he says that, his dad comes to pick him up and head home as Dee Dee asks him if he can watch the kids tomorrow so she and Betty can run a 10K. Naturally, Chaz happily agrees, and in the background, the babies cheer, happy that they'll get to meet Barney because they're going over to Chuckie's house tomorrow. When the next day rolls around, though, and Chuckie's friends show up, something pretty odd happens. Phil, Lil, and Tommy all stand there in Chuckie's living room as he quietly and slyly calls them from a hallway nearby. They follow him down the hallway, apprehensive and scared.
Is it always this dark in here? Only when my dad forgets to change the light bulb.
So, on the surface, this statement doesn't mean too much. But when we dig a little deeper and add some context, it hints at a truth a lot more bleak and depressing. The question that Lil asked Chuckie was very specific. She asked if it's always this dark in here. And his answer isn't, no, the light bulb just needs to be replaced. His answer was, only when my dad forgets to change the light bulb. Which would imply this isn't the first time Chaz has let an area of the house be dark for an extended period of time because he put off changing the bulb for one reason or another. However, one particular detail really does stand out about that. The area of the house that this hallway is a part of. It doesn't lead to Chuckie's room. It doesn't lead to the kitchen or the garage. It leads to another dark and kinda creepy room. One that doesn't have very many things in it. Just a bed, a little stand-up tray, a nightstand with a TV, and clothes and trash all over the place, as well as cobwebs up in the corner, and a collection of meticulously sorted VHS tapes, confirming that this is none other than Chuckie's dad's room that he's led his friends to. Now, we've got a lot to unpack here. First of all, one minor detail that really caught my eye is comparing the rest of the house to Chaz's bedroom and the dark hallway leading to it. Looking at the entryway to his house, there's a maintained potted plant on his porch. His living room looks clean and organized, and nothing really stands out as out of the ordinary. It looks like Chaz goes out of his way to keep a nice, clean, and welcoming house. Meanwhile, his bedroom feels like the opposite. It's devoid of substantial furniture like dressers or anything, and it's a mess, looking like he hasn't put any care into it for a little while, and there's little to no decorations. This, on the whole, really feels like it's meant to symbolize the personal struggle that Chaz is facing in life, and the fact that he refuses to let it affect the way that he cares for his son. Sure, he may be in a deep depression after losing his wife and struggling to care for himself as a result, but Chaz is the last person to let his son play in a dirty and dark living room because he himself is having a hard time in life. Even though he may be struggling with his own mental health and self-care, he makes sure that Chuckie is taken care of. He makes sure that he has a clean house, a nice room, and everything he needs to live a happy life. Even if Chaz might not have that for himself on an individual level. That fact really does speak volumes about Chaz as a father and as a person, as well as the struggle that he's been through. The fact that he's neglecting himself could be a huge indicator that he's bottling up a lot of personal issues and difficult feelings in the wake of his life changing so drastically over the last 2 years. With that being said, though, we have to commend the guy because in all reality, raising a son and giving him 110% while you struggle to give yourself even 20% is a truly difficult thing to do. And it's something that Chaz does by himself, barring the exception of help from his friends with babysitting. As we see this one continue, Chuckie ventures forth into his dad's closet and he shows his friends this big fish decoration that his dad has put away, leaving them all amazed. He says that he found it with Barney a few days ago, and at that, they ask where Barney is anyways. To which Chuckie says that he refused to eat his broccoli, so he was sent to prison. And before they can ask any further questions, Chuckie's dad shows up, clicking on his bedroom light and discovering the kids in his closet. And also the fish decoration that Chuckie found, which we learned that he had put away for a reason.
You know, Chuckie, your mother never liked this fish much. But hey, I guess now we can hang it back up in the dining room, huh?
Now, this is a crazy moment to take in because if I recall correctly, I think this is the very first mention of Chuckie's mom in a context that acknowledges the fact that she's gone. And it's wild to realize that with how nonchalantly she's brought up, it almost feels like she just kind of left or something. Not necessarily like she passed away. I mainly say that because if you're familiar with this series, which if you're watching this far in, I definitely assume you are, you know that when the time comes that the topic of what happened to her is brought up, it ends up being a huge moment. One that was led up to by Chuckie's dad refusing to talk about her with Chuckie for a really long time. Knowing the moment like that is on the horizon definitely makes this one land a lot different in hindsight. It's almost like the writers of the show weren't 100% sure what they wanted Chuckie's mom's fate to be at this point. However, they knew without a shadow of a doubt that she was no longer in the picture. Plus, like the way Chaz worded what he said about hanging that fish back up, it almost feels like his wife had departed relatively recently. Whether that's the case or not, though, the fact that this episode would be the first to introduce us to the definite conclusion that Chuckie's mom isn't around anymore makes it kind of a landmark episode by default. As this episode keeps going, though, Chuckie ends up telling his friends that him and Barney are planning on going to the park tomorrow if Barney gets out of prison in time. So, of course, wanting to meet Barney, Tommy devises a plan to convince his mom to take him to the park. He holds his pail and his shovel and keeps staring out the window with tears in his eyes. And though she's got a really busy day scheduled and her feet are killing her from the 10K the day before, she can't help but feel guilty and budge, making the choice to bring her work to the park in order to make Tommy happy. When they get there, though, Tommy is just flabbergasted with what he discovers. He hears Chuckie nearby arguing with Barney about whether or not they should go to the moon, but much to his surprise, he doesn't see Barney or anybody anywhere near Chuckie. It almost looks like Chuckie is just talking to himself. Tommy ends up sneaking up on Chuckie and surprising him, and when he asks about who he was talking to, Chuckie decides it's time to introduce the two, explaining to Tommy that Barney is actually invisible and that only he can hear it when Barney speaks. As you'd imagine, Tommy is pretty confused by this, but ultimately before he can weigh in on the situation, his mom comes up from behind and picks him up, saying that they need to get downtown to drop off some important paperwork. The two take off, and the next day we see Tommy hanging out with Phil and Lil at his house as he explains to them that Barney is invisible. As you'd imagine, they're just blown away, having no idea that people could even be invisible. But not for long, Chuckie shows up, claiming to have brought Barney with him. Together, the group do all sorts of fun things like crawling around under the rug and trying to play basketball, among other things. Eventually, though, Barney ends up running out of ideas. However, Phil, Lil, and Tommy aren't having that. They force Chuckie to ask again, and Barney ends up suggesting an idea that Chuckie isn't really a big fan of. He says that they should try to get up on the roof. Tommy remembers that there's an access point to the attic in his grandpa's room, and they all head there, despite Chuckie arguing that Barney might be wrong about this one. Sadly, though, they all disregard Chuckie's concerns, saying that they're going up anyways. However, when Phil and Lil accuse him of lying and saying that Barney is probably already up there without them, this happens.
Barney isn't real! He's not real? Nope. He's just made up.
As Chuckie apologizes to his friends for making all of this up, they end up actually impressed that he was able to come up with such a genuinely awesome guy that had them all fully convinced he was real. And Tommy in particular is impressed to learn that all of the brave stuff they did together, like exploring his dad's closet and everything, was all really just Chuckie being brave on his own. Which, for Chuckie, is a big realization. He gets a massive smile on his face as he takes in the fact that he genuinely was brave on his own, and that there really was never anyone else there pushing him to do all that stuff he was doing. By the end of this one, though, we end up pretty much right back where we started, with Phil, Lil, and Tommy sitting around bored. Only this time they have Chuckie sitting around bored with them as well. They ask if Barney can come back, but Chuckie says once you say someone's made up, it's kinda hard to get them to come over anymore. And just like that, his dad comes up from behind and grabs him from the playpen, planning to take him back home now. Only to stop on the way out and set Chuckie down so he can ask Dee Dee one final question.
I'm sorry I told that fib about you being made up, Barney. Maybe it would be better if we didn't tell other people about you.
As Chuckie puts his arm around Barney, saying that he'll always be his friend, the camera zooms out on the neighborhood, and this episode comes to an end on what seems to be a rather light-hearted note. I mean, at first glance, this one really feels like another silly ending gag that's not meant to be taken too seriously. But when we peel back the layers, there's a lot going on here emotionally. As far as Barney goes, he's just an imaginary friend for Chuckie. He's not real. He's a figment of his imagination that Chuckie clearly uses to play and inspire when he's by himself. However, Chuckie finds himself feeling different when he's around this imaginary friend. He's brave. He's adventurous. He's willing to do things that he wouldn't normally think about doing. And at that, it becomes clear that whether Chuckie realizes it or not, Barney is more or less a frame of mind for Chuckie. He's like a specific mindset that allows him to put his fear and apprehension aside for a while and explore like any other kid would, without hesitation and unexplained fear. The thing is, though, this comes with the truth that, like Tommy pointed out, all of this bravery was inside of Chuckie already. Barney couldn't have given Chuckie this bravery because he isn't real. He's just a state of mind that was able to bring that level of bravery out of Chuckie. What really says a lot, though, is the fact that in the end, Chuckie clearly still held the belief that Barney actually was real. That comes with so many different angles that it could be pointing things toward, The biggest being that when Chuckie did tell them that he wasn't real, it was because he had dug himself so deep into a bad situation that he realized that it was easier to tell them that Barney wasn't real than it would be to find an alternative solution to the problem at hand. Which, I mean, considering it's literal toddlers trying to get on the roof of the house, it's a pretty big life-threatening and imminent problem. Outside of that, it could say a lot about Chuckie's mental state and his perception of himself. Almost like a sense of imposter syndrome. Like Chuckie couldn't accept the fact that it really was him who was brave on his own. Because deep down inside, that's not who he feels like he is. Even when he does do brave things, he doesn't feel like he's a brave person. And the tough part about imposter syndrome is that a lot of times there's not much you can do to prove that wrong in your mind in the heat of the moment. He could be given an award for bravery and still he wouldn't feel like he's a brave person. So, in a way, for him, it's almost easier to continue as if Barney really were real in secrecy, because if he truly believes that, he'll continue to be brave as if he's doing it on his own. It's kind of another sign of emotional intelligence within Chuckie, because he recognizes that there are mechanisms he can rely on to help better himself and ease into a point where he's able to be brave on his own without needing to pretend that his imaginary friend is nearby. Speaking of Barney, though, one thing I find truly intriguing to ponder is how Chuckie describes Barney as this really cool kid who's so awesome that he's never scared when he's around, which is actually pretty similar to how Chuckie would describe Tommy when you really think about it. However, as far as Tommy is concerned, Chuckie does still feel fear around him. But he knows that Tommy is usually going to go out of his way to protect the both of them, so he at least feels like he has someone to come to for protection in a scary situation. But when we consider that, it's almost like Chuckie cooked up an imaginary Tommy to follow him around so that he could be more brave and feel safer when it comes to exploring and living life in general. It's almost like a coping mechanism of sorts for Chuckie. It's like him coming to a point where he's getting frustrated that his fears and apprehensions are getting in the way of him having a normal childhood and being able to play. So he's doing anything he can mentally to work past those hurdles. Which, as interesting as it is to take in a toddler inventing his own coping mechanisms at such a young age, it also goes to show how important that frame of mind really is. Chuckie is the kind of kid who doesn't believe in himself. He doubts himself constantly. However, sometimes that doesn't happen when Tommy's around, and Chuckie notices that. And that's something he wants to be able to utilize even when Tommy isn't around. Hence where Barney comes into play. Because Barney acts as a tool for Chuckie to ease himself into being able to be brave on his own. Speaking of frame of mind and how crucial it is, though, it's interesting to think how sensitive that Chuckie's frame of mind can tend to be. We've already discussed how much he harbors natural fear and phobias. However, one really heartbreaking aspect of his character is how those fears can tend to come and go. Even fears that he's previously conquered. Possibly the most heart-wrenching episode to epitomize that point that we would see this early on would be the episode called The Slide. This episode is one that I do look back on fondly because it's genuinely a good episode, but admittedly, it's also one that puts on display just how well this show walks that fine line between maintaining what makes an episode good and what makes it invoke those dreadful feelings of defeat. And honestly, that can be a difficult line to walk, especially as far as this show is concerned. With it being about babies and their curious sense of wonder, it tends to be pretty lighthearted by default. And when the writers do introduce a situation meant to invoke dread, it can very quickly hurtle across that line into full-blown anxiety-inducing chaos. Sometimes in a way that isn't all too relatable. In my opinion, though, this episode is one that comes with a truly realistic struggle that most can relate to in some way, and as a result, it nearly walks that line perfectly. This episode starts out at the park where Tommy, Chuckie, Phil, and Lil are playing on a hot and sunny day. Phil and Lil are doing their own thing as Tommy builds a sandcastle by himself. All the while, Chuckie decides to go down the slide, one of his favorite activities that he's done plenty of times without issue. This time though, Chuckie approaches the slide and starts to ascend the ladder like normal, but on the way, he makes the unfortunate choice to look down, and from that measly 2 steps up, the ground below looks like he's 2 stories high. Chuckie starts to scream and cry as his dad comes running for dear life to help him, and just like that, we cut to the next day where we see Tommy sitting with Phil and Lil in his sandbox talking about how awful they feel for Chuckie.
Poor Chuckie.
Yeah, he always loved going down the slide.
It was about the only thing he wasn't scared of.
The 3 friends sit there wondering what caused Chuckie to freak out like that, just feeling terrible for their friend. And for me, it's interesting to sit back and contemplate that for just a little bit. This is yet another, albeit a lot more direct, example of how Chuckie is misunderstood, especially by his friends, who, in all honesty, have nothing but kind intentions and genuinely do want to understand where he's coming from. For them, though, it's just a slide. They don't carry the same level of fear that Chuckie constantly carries, and as a result, they don't understand how something that wasn't a fear yesterday can randomly become a fear today. Sometimes there's not even a logical reason for it. Considering this specific episode, I really do appreciate the fact that as far as Chuckie being misunderstood goes, it seems to be evolving into a bit more of a soft and gentle misunderstanding on his friend's behalf, rather than an abrasive and questioning sense of misunderstanding like we saw in My Friend Barney. In that one, Chuckie's friends didn't understand Barney from the start. Tommy would question Chuckie pretty regularly about random details, wanting to know more about Barney and his life, which isn't inherently abrasive. However, when we got to the point where Barney actually came around and played with them, Phil and Lil were constantly questioning Chuckie and specifically how he interacted with Barney, insinuating that he could be lying about what Barney was saying and the opinions that he holds. I mean, in general, it's frustrating to see them continue to misunderstand Chuckie time and time again in so many different ways. But at least this time they're seeming to be open to genuinely understanding Chuckie's fears. As the 3 sit there confused though, all of a sudden Chuckie shows up, completely silent and not saying a word to any of them. They offer multiple different games to play with him, hoping to cheer him up and avoiding the topic of the slide by any means possible, but Chuckie doesn't really let them get away with it. He calls them on it, saying that he knows that they're trying to be extra nice to him because of the whole slide situation. Regardless, though, they all still decide to play coy for some reason, pretending to not know what he's talking about.
You guys saw what happened at the park. You saw how I can't do it anymore.
As Chuckie sits there weeping in sorrow, Tommy tries to ease his pain, dismissing the whole situation and saying that he shouldn't sweat it too much because it's just a slide. However, that seems to just make the situation sting so much more for Chuckie, because for him, it's not just a slide. It's a key part of his childhood. and one of the few things he isn't terrified of. He says that he likes the slide and the way it feels when he goes down it, and the idea of not being able to go down it anymore breaks his heart. But even then, he vows to never go down it again. And naturally, his friends are pretty confused. They know good and well that he's passionate about going down the slide, so they're ultimately unable to fathom why he wouldn't want to do it ever again, and why it would have scared him so much in the first place. However, as the story continues, Chuckie ends up telling them that all of this actually started days prior. Him and his dad went to the Rugrats world equivalent of Chuck E. Cheese, and while they were there, Chuckie came upon an awesome elephant slide in the ball pit that he really wanted to go down. It's this cool little tiny slide meant for toddlers, and it's only a couple feet high. He excitedly went up the ladder, and at the top, he came upon a tunnel that he climbed and climbed and climbed, and once he reached the top of that tunnel, he found himself accidentally at the highest point in the whole building, the big kid slide. He looks over the side and down below and sees the slide descending through the clouds with multiple loops and a terrifying 90-degree angle descent.
And there was a bunch of kids pushing me behind saying, "Go, little kid, go!" And I was saying, "No, big kids, no!"
At that point, Chuckie did the one and only thing that he knows how to do in this situation. Cry and panic, grabbing onto that big kid's leg and refusing to go down. Tommy tries to point out to him that when that happened, it wasn't on his slide, it was on a big kid's slide. But Chuckie says it's no use. He's now terrified of all slides. And to be honest, that is a really heavy moment to take in. I mean, really, all of this. From the get-go, this episode really starts out just so heavy-hearted, and we don't even really know it. At the start, when we saw Chuckie approach the slide with overwhelming confidence, this is at a point where he's already been through that traumatic experience, and he's already trying his best to overcome it. Which, for Chuckie, that's huge. He's the kind of kid who usually goes through something that truly sticks with him, and from that point on, avoids that thing like the plague, holding on to residual fear from the initial traumatic moment. As he approached that slide, though, he didn't feel any of that. He felt strong and excited to climb up and enjoy the breeze on his way down. To know that he would work up that level of courage just to be torn down emotionally is enough to invoke just the deepest sense of melancholy. On top of that, though, we really need to take in the sight that Chuckie saw when he was at the top of the massive big kid slide. When he looked down, he straight up saw something that nightmares are made of. I don't know about you, but I've had nightmares where I'm driving on a freeway that's just like this. Except maybe add a vertical corkscrew and a massive jump with water underneath. I have that nightmare at minimum once or twice a year, and it leaves me waking up sweating every single time. And honestly, just having those nightmares alone is bad enough. However, I can't possibly imagine what it would be like to approach a bridge or a complex freeway system while I'm driving, and instead of seeing it for what it really is, in a panic, my brain sees something like this instead. That's a level of fear that just blows most out of the water. Having such an extreme, spine-chilling level of terror that you pretty much hallucinate your greatest fears. It sounds absolutely terrifying, and knowing that Chuckie is just a 2-year-old facing something like this is just such a painful punch to the gut in general. This poor kid literally had one of his favorite activities in his entire life ripped away from him by one really terrible experience. And I don't know what's worse. The fact that it happened in the first place, or seeing just how much it's affecting him. Chuckie is genuinely heartbroken over the fact that he can't go near a slide without panicking immediately. It's just so sad when you see how devastated he is over this, and on that note, this is a very clear representation of the very real truth of how deeply traumatic experiences can affect people and stick with them. Going through an extreme level of trauma can make it so you never experience that activity you were doing when that trauma occurred the same way again. For example, some people who experience a severe car accident while driving might carry some trauma and struggle to get behind the wheel again, especially in the specific kind of scenario where the accident occurred. Or some people who've been attacked while walking late at night by themselves might never be able to walk alone at night again. It's a very morbid and sad truth about trauma. Post-traumatic stress is absolutely real, and it seems that Chuckie is struggling with a form of it after being embarrassed and terrified on the high-up slide in front of all these strangers. One thing that I do really appreciate about this show is the fact that it's not afraid to tackle really hard topics like this, and when it does, it goes out of its way to not only do so using Chuckie, the lowest hanging fruit, as a vessel for the message. I mean, we definitely have to acknowledge that Chuckie, being the most terrified of the group constantly, it's easy for them to make an episode with the hidden underlying message being about PTSD and revolve the whole thing around him. However, there were multiple instances of other Rugrats struggling with past events, including even Tommy himself in the episode where he gets that cut on his finger at the park. In my opinion, details like that are important. If the writers of the show go out of their way to fall into common tropes within the show too often, the message kind of falls flat. If it was only ever Chuckie getting scared, it would be easier to chalk it up to him being a scaredy cat. However, the fact that others in this group end up struggling with post-traumatic stress at some point too makes it come across as a lot more valid of an issue for them to be raising awareness for. As we keep trekking on in this episode though, Chuckie continues confiding in his friends about how sad he is about being terrified of the slide now, while, as luck would have it, Angelica is hiding behind a tree nearby. She ends up coming out from behind the tree, and of course she gets right to roasting Chuckie and dragging him down further.
Face it, Chuckie, you're a scaredy cat. A big, fat scaredy cat. It's true.
While Chuckie cries his eyes out in the sandbox, hurt by Angelica's words and his inability to slide anymore, she just kind of walks off without a care, feeling accomplished that she made Chuckie cry even harder than he already was. And as the babies sit there wondering what they could do to help Chuckie, they find themselves with only one person to come crawling to for help. Everybody's favorite compassionate soul, Susie Carmichael. As you'd imagine, Susie, being the sweet girl that she is, she's happy to help Chuckie. She takes him under her wing and teaches him all about believing in himself and being willing to get back in the ring after you've been knocked out. She has him repeating mantras, and she's putting him through the ringer, making him do all sorts of activities to train for getting up on the slide again. When one of those activities sends him belly flopping into the sandbox, however, Chuckie ends up struggling to think about even getting near the slide again.
Well, I guess it's no use.
I don't think Chuckie's never going to stop being scared going down that slide.
As Angelica sits nearby, hearing what Phil and Lil are saying, she dogpiles on the Chuckie disheartening train, saying that they're just echoing what she's been saying from the start, doubling down on her belief that Chuckie is a spineless coward. But as Angelica stands there dragging him down and ripping him to pieces, Susie vouches for Chuckie, saying that he's brave and arguing with Angelica tooth and nail. And we definitely need to stop and recognize how powerful this moment is right here. Chuckie feels lower than he's ever felt before, being dragged down by his own friends and torn apart even further by Angelica, who just intends to decimate his confidence and stomp it into the dirt. It's really heartbreaking because even Tommy is just silent at this moment. He's not arguing with Angelica or telling Phil and Lil to stop putting Chuckie down. And I don't want to sit here and say that paints Tommy in a bad light, because he's just a baby and him being caught like a deer in headlights is understandable. But it really does say a lot about Susie. She's the kind of girl who always stands up for the babies when Angelica is trying to hurt them, physically or emotionally. And this is one of the earliest examples that I recall seeing of that, especially when we consider that Susie was a later addition to the show, moving into the neighborhood partway into season 2. The fact that she's the only one advocating for Chuckie here, and she's known him the least out of anybody, is definitely a huge testament to her character and just how pivotal she is to the show. Chuckie is incredibly lucky to have someone like Susie in his corner, because she's a real one who'll go up to bat for him and give it her all when no one else is willing to. At that though, Chuckie ends up getting genuinely fed up with being put down and having his bravery questioned, so he finally decides to put his foot down and he proclaims once and for all that no matter what, he is going down that slide. We cut to the following day where everyone is gathered to watch Chuckie conquer his fear, and as he approaches the ladder, he closes his eyes in terror, going up slow and steady. After a while and some deep breaths, he finally makes it to the top and is just through the roof proud of himself for making it up there. He sits on the slide, looking down on the playground, feeling like he's on top of the world. But when it comes time to slide down, he hesitates, as the slide morphs into this gigantic runway ready to propel him through the air like a plane. He inches forward, and within a matter of half a second, he's at top speed, tearing down the slide like Speed Racer in the Mach 5, screaming in fear. And when he reaches the bottom, he's launched a few feet away from the slide, landing on his back with a loud thud. And as all of his friends run over to check on him, it turns out that not only is he absolutely fine, but he had a blast going down the slide again, feeling exuberant about the fact that he can do it again.
There goes one big brave kid.
Now, this one really is such a strong episode to take in, especially for those who struggle with anxiety and fear in their daily life. Seeing a kid like Chuckie being able to conquer those fears works as a positive source of inspiration for striving to overcome your own deep-rooted fears. On that same note, though, it's a testament to just how difficult it truly is to overcome fear once you've been through something that truly messed you up on a personal level. And the sad truth is that in the real world, some people never get the resolution that Chuckie saw in the end. Some people never get their moment when they get to do the thing again and enjoy it like they once did. Because, in all reality, sometimes it doesn't ever feel the same way again. Sometimes you try doing the thing and it just doesn't feel right, safe, or like something you can ever imagine doing again. And the key thing this episode kind of doesn't show you is that's okay. Sometimes there are fears in life that are so incredibly overwhelming, and the return on overcoming them isn't really all that justified. The fear of doing that thing outweighs the potential gain from having said you've done the thing again. Sure, being a kid on the slide and overcoming that fear is one thing, but when it comes to bigger, more serious things, sometimes that can be a lot harder to fathom. All in all, though, I think one of the most valuable aspects of this episode is just how relatable that it all is. Personally, I'll be open and say that I went through a pretty similar experience to Chuckie when I was a little kid, and I actually remember it. It wasn't the slide, though. For me, it was the escalator at the mall. I went from being able to go down it without issues to being absolutely terrified of it what felt like out of nowhere. Right about the time in the early 2000s when that massive escalator accident happened in Colorado. I don't recall where I heard about it as a kid, but that, combined with seeing scenes in shows where characters got their shoelaces caught in the escalator, I was just completely terrified. Thankfully, I was able to overcome that, but still, the relatability factor of this one absolutely contributes to how perfectly the message lands. Because in all reality, a lot of us have genuinely had an experience similar to Chuckie and his random fear of the slide that came as a result of trauma. As far as traumatic experiences go, Chuckie would obviously be no stranger to them. Time and time again, in this show, we would see him going through experiences that would have a lasting effect on him as a person. Sure, fearing the slide is one thing. That's rather minor, and it's something that he was able to overcome with a bit of perseverance. However, other traumatic experiences, not so much. Because sadly, there were actually quite a few situations that would unfold in this show where trauma would be inflicted upon Chuckie and it just kind of gets brushed over and never really handled properly or addressed. And in those moments, we would see the dark and morbid core of Rugrats peek through. This next episode we're going to dive into is one that showcases this in a truly underhanded and easily overlooked way. It's an episode that played into a trope that a lot of other shows were also portraying at the time. However, though it did so in a way that came across more lighthearted and childish, it was actually a lot more grim than most other shows that tried to follow this same kind of story. Of course, we're talking about none other than Driving Miss Angelica. Now, Driving Miss Angelica is one of those episodes that, in my opinion, is kind of slept on. It's one that a lot of people seem to not like, understandably. Angelica totally sucks in this episode. But even with that considered, this episode is one that low-key presents the quintessential embodiment of nearly every character in such an amazing way. For example, as this one starts out, we see Chuckie, happy as can be, picking dandelions and blowing the little blowballs off and laughing with joy as he watches them float through the sky freely, all by himself. No friends nearby at this exact moment, just pure bliss, enjoying the happiness of life without a worry, chasing joy in its simplest form. Zooming into Chuckie as a character, moving past the trauma, the fear, and the anxiety, this absolutely boils his character down to its most basic essence. He's a positive, joyous, and fun-loving kid when he's not being overwhelmed by terrifying thoughts and paranoia. As Chuckie is enjoying himself in this moment, though, oddly enough, on the other side of the bushes is Drew of all people, talking on the phone about stock portfolios with a business partner as he grabs the newspaper, telling his business partner that he can't come to the office because he's babysitting. And I mean, this is definitely Drew in a nutshell. He's busy talking about money, ignoring his daughter and the other kids, and just kind of in his own little world. He has no idea about anything going on around him, and he doesn't seem to really care about any of it. He's the type to care when things go bad and he has to fix the problem. And until that moment comes, he offers little to no care or attention to the kids that he's in charge of. That's exactly why what happens in this one isn't really surprising. Because Drew, the one in charge, is a total airhead focused on trivial things like money when he's supposed to be keeping children safe. As all that's going on though, we see Tommy standing next to Angelica, who's laying in a fold-out sun chair, asking her random questions like why the sky is blue, as if she knows the answer to that. Of course, getting nothing but angry responses from her, as per usual. This right here, again, it's just the epitome of their relationship. Tommy is curious and inquisitive, and he knows that Angelica is older than him and seems to have answers for everything. So he asks her. And of course, her being the kid that she is, naturally she just responds in anger. Honestly, this opening just kind of feels perfect. There isn't much here that doesn't make sense other than the general simple fact that Drew of all people is watching Chuckie and Tommy. I mean, Tommy I guess, because that's his nephew, but having Chuckie is especially interesting because Drew and Chaz honestly don't seem very close. With that being said, though, the adults in this show really seem to be utilizing their village, so I guess it's not all too surprising. What is surprising, though, is the fact that not too far from Drew's house, there's a group of older kids on big wheel tricycles rolling around like they're a biker gang. And as they're coming hurling at full speed down the sidewalk, Chuckie, who has no idea that they're coming, catches sight of a piece of candy laying on the ground. Naturally, right in the path of the baby biker gang. He runs right up to it with a massive smile, super excited to eat this random ground candy, when all of a sudden, this happens.
Chuckie! Boy, that was close.
Yeah, you just saw that right. Chuckie was literally about to get taken out by multiple kids who were way bigger than him going full speed. And of all people to save him, it wasn't Drew, the adult in charge. It wasn't Tommy, his best friend, who was watching. Oddly enough, it was Angelica. She saw them coming, and she was the one who reacted on a moment's notice, and honestly, she deserves some kudos for that. Chuckie could have gotten seriously hurt, and her father, of course, is just oblivious that literally anything even happened. He has no clue that someone else's kid just almost got seriously hurt on his watch because he's so careless. Not to mention the fact that these kids are straight up getting into random candy on the sidewalk and planning to eat it? I mean, come on. People warn about trick-or-treating and checking your kids' candy nowadays. Eating candy off the ground is straight up disgusting. And of course, these toddlers don't know any better. They see candy and they eat candy. It's as simple as that to them. That's why it's so crucial to keep a close eye on your kids, especially when you live in a heavily populated neighborhood and your yard isn't fenced in. Honestly, Drew is lucky it was just kids on big wheels. Because, in all seriousness, if Chuckie was in the street and that was a car, I can't say for certain that Angelica would have been able to save him. With that being said, too, we have to take a second to acknowledge the fact that that's kind of what they're trying to get at. Kids on big wheels, heading full speed as a kid wanders into their path. Yeah, this is definitely a more tame and watered down portrayal of someone almost getting struck by a car while being in the road, and that's truly dark when you stop and think about it. Especially considering that this is a children's cartoon. Just like that, though, Angelica snatches the piece of candy from Chuckie and she puts it in her mouth, only to be disgusted and spit it out when she realizes that it's coconut flavored. And as she does that, Chuckie is in the background thanking her profusely for saving his life. Tommy and Chuckie hail Angelica as a hero, as Chuckie says that he wishes that he could do something to repay her. And she says that it's no big deal at all whatsoever. He just has to say thank you.
Oh yeah, and be my slave for the rest of your life.
Angelica says that the rules say that if you save someone's life, they have to be your slave forever. And as Chuckie sits there with a terrified and worried look on his face, I can't help but just scoff at how insane this is. Like, not only the fact that Angelica is making such an audacious claim to begin with, but also the fact that Chuckie actually decided to go along with it. He not only agrees to be her slave, which, just feels like such a strong word here, but he also feels like he has no choice. hence the slavery of it all. He's not doing this willingly. She's forcing him to do it because he's under the impression that he's forever in her debt. He's not putting up a fight. He's not trying to argue. He's just swallowing his pride and his fears and continuing on with his life as Angelica's 2-year-old slave. We see Chuckie going around waiting on her hand and foot, doing every single thing that she says without complaint and accepting every insult that she dishes out at him and every moment that she decides to smack things out of his hands and abuse him. And I'm realizing something here, to be honest. The more I see the way that Angelica treats Chuckie, I'm feeling like I'm watching Charlotte and how she treats her assistant, Jonathan. It's pretty evident that Angelica, being the ever-perceptive toddler that she is, has been watching her mom pretty closely, and her behaving the way that she is with Chuckie is clearly her emulating her own version of the behavior that she sees her mom display toward her assistant on the daily. It's seriously concerning as well to take in the fact that Angelica doesn't see anything wrong with any of this. It's wild to think that she sees her mom in the way she treats people, and instead of thinking about how she doesn't want to be like that, she thinks about how inspiring that kind of behavior is and how she wants to be able to boss people around herself someday. And really, that just boils down to ethics and who Angelica is as a person. Of course she looks at it selfishly. Of course she doesn't consider how much damage that her mother does to Jonathan. Because the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Charlotte looks down on Jonathan in the same kind of way that Angelica looks down on Chuckie. And as a result, she defaults to acting toward Chuckie in the same way that she's seen her mom act toward Jonathan. As this one continues, though, we see Angelica's mistreatment of poor, enslaved Chuckie getting worse and worse. And eventually, Tommy ends up deciding to stand up for Chuckie and put Angelica in her place once and for all.
No, Angelica! This time I just gotta put my foot on! You can't tell Chuckie what to do anymore!
Unfortunately, as noble as an effort on Tommy's behalf as this is, Angelica defaults right to guilt-tripping Chuckie, saying that she's not mad, she's just disappointed, and reminding him in a really sad tone that she almost got hurt saving his life. And with that level of guilt applied here, Chuckie folds, saying that he will help her, leaving Tommy frustrated that he's letting Angelica manipulate him like that. In the long run, though, they end up on a quest to get a box of chocolates that Drew has stashed away up in the top of the closet. But as they're doing that, or should I say, as Angelica forces Chuckie to dangerously scale to the very top of the shelves, Drew walks by, not realizing that they're in there, and he shuts the door on instinct, making it so Angelica is under the impression that the two of them are locked in there. She bangs on the door and yells for her dad, but he's listening to a Reptar on Ice tape on full blast, so he can't hear a single thing going on. Like a true rock star parent does, right? And at that, with them both stuck in there, Angelica begins to panic, thinking that they're not gonna make it.
We're running out of air! Chuckie, I order you to stop breathing. We gotta save all the air for me!
But maybe we're not trapped.
Hold your breath!
After holding his breath for all of 2 seconds, though, Chuckie lets his air out and decides that this is dumb, making the choice to try the door again. And as it opens without issue, he tells Angelica that she was just turning the knob the wrong way. Of course, she's so relieved and she rushes out of the closet, celebrating and thanking Chuckie non-stop for saving her life as she kisses the floor. Upon Tommy realizing that Angelica said Chuckie saved her life, though, he starts connecting the dots in his mind, pointing out to her that she said the rule is when you save someone's life, they're automatically assigned to be your slave for the rest of their life. And just like that, this episode comes to an end with Angelica having tried her best to argue her way out of it, now playing the role of the slave while Chuckie wears the crown and relaxes, getting the king treatment for him and Tommy at Angelica's expense. And really, it's just so sincerely obnoxious to take in the kind of precedent that Angelica's trying to set here. Her trying to enforce this made-up rule that when you save someone, they're automatically your slave for the rest of their life is an absolute sign of corrupt morals down to her core. And we can't help but just feel so sad for Chuckie because he's the target in all of this. His is the soul that she's decided she wants to own. One of the toughest things to realize about Angelica is that she's the kind of person who doesn't ever really do anything for anyone else out of the kindness of her heart or because it's the right thing to do. She's instead the type to help someone with intentions of manipulating her way into getting something out of it, and especially making the other person miserable along the way. Hence why Chuckie is the perfect target for her. He's the kind of person who will accept the misery and continue serving her without question. And it's just so defeating. Especially knowing that somewhere inside of him is the strength to stand up to Angelica and put her in her place. We've seen him do it previously. The fact that he goes from having the courage to stand up to her just to revert back to bending to her domineering will, it's just so disheartening, more than anything, because it really just enables her to continue doing this over and over. It leaves her under the impression that this is an okay way to treat people and that she can get what she wants by asserting herself above others. Really, at the heart of it, especially when it comes to Chuckie, all of Angelica's interactions with people feel transactional, but at the same time, a complete scam of a transaction where she's always plotting to come out on top. Above all else, though, it's really dismal to look at this whole episode from top to bottom and realize that none of this should have happened because Angelica shouldn't have been the only one left to save Chuckie when those 3 kids were about to hit him on their big wheels. That should have been Drew's job. Yet, instead, he's busy talking on the phone for ages and listening to Reptar tapes on full blast with headphones on. And I guess with that being said, it's simply astounding to take in just how awful of a father that Drew is, how terrible of a mother that Charlotte is, and how intolerable of a child that Angelica is. Their entire family is just nails on a chalkboard, especially when we consider poor Chuckie. Drew pretty much ignores the kid, Angelica treats him like he's her prey, and Charlotte, well, I wouldn't be surprised to find out that she doesn't even know Chuckie's name or that he exists in the first place. The thing is, though, if you thought that episode showcased Angelica being a danger to Chuckie, you haven't seen anything yet, because the next episode we're going to check out is one that straight up portrays Angelica in full-blown serial killer horror movie mode. It's one that sees her putting Chuckie in such a mind-blowingly dangerous scenario that it's almost crazy to think that this situation even played out. Up next, we're diving into the episode Tooth or Dare. Now, this episode, in full transparency, is just authentically twisted in my opinion. Even as a child, I saw this one and it left me feeling kind of shaken to my core. It's one that, even as an adult, not only is it messed up, but the more you really think about it, the worse it gets. This episode sees Susie and Angelica hanging out with Tommy as they all watch this videotape about taking proper care of your teeth. Angelica asks Susie where she got that movie, and she explains that her mom bought it after her brother Edwin lost his first tooth and the tooth fairy brought him some money. And immediately, Angelica stops right in her tracks, completely fixated on the fact that there's a fairy who brings you money in exchange for teeth.
That's the dumbest thing I ever heard. If you believe that, I got a sandbox in Florida to sell you.
Susie, in response, instead of focusing on arguing with Angelica, decides to prove it by bringing her right to Edwin, who, keep in mind, is the most intelligent of pretty much all the characters in the show. They go into his room and find him reading a book from his personal library as Susie asks him to tell Angelica about the Tooth Fairy. And after she hears the story, along with seeing the gap in his teeth, Angelica is just mind blown. We cut to her at Tommy's house, hanging out with him and Chuckie in the playpen as she talks to him about the Tooth Fairy, telling him all about how they're going to get rich from getting teeth from other kids and selling them to her. Which is low-key hilarious to take in, because back in the year 2000, South Park actually ended up making this same exact episode, with Cartman being the one pitching the idea, trying to get teeth for the Tooth Fairy in hopes of making $10 million. Personally, I find it so hilarious because quite a while back, maybe even like a year or two ago, I ended up writing down this video idea to make a deep dive comparing Angelica and Cartman because they really are so much alike. I don't recall if an audience member suggested that idea in the comments and I wrote it down or what, but I never really got around to making that one. But looking at this episode and realizing that these two psychopathic characters both came up with the same exact idea, it's actually really hilarious and definitely makes me reconsider that idea. As far as Angelica goes though, she ends up tasking Tommy with getting some teeth for her, but he struggles to understand how they're going to get the teeth out of her mouth.
We're not getting any teeth from my mouth. We're gonna get the teeth out of your mouth.
When Tommy opens his mouth up, Angelica sees nothing but a tiny budding tooth barely growing through Tommy's gums, and she quickly realizes that isn't going to work. So she decides instead to set her sights on Chuckie, who has two perfectly good front teeth for her to forcefully yank from his mouth. Even though he doesn't want to do it, Angelica and Tommy grab him by his arms and drag him over to the corner of the playpen as they promise to split the money from his teeth with him. Angelica swears that it won't hurt him, and even though Chuckie is apprehensive, he lets Angelica pull and rip on his jaw, attempting to pry the only two teeth in his mouth out with her bare hands. And of course, that doesn't work and just kind of leaves him hurting. So Angelica decides to run off, coming back with a screwdriver.
What are you gonna do with that? I'm gonna pry Chuckie's tooths out. You're not putting that in my mouth, Angelica!
Now, I can't stress enough how much this situation gave me anxiety as a kid, and this isn't even the worst of it. Seeing this 3-year-old wanting to take a screwdriver to the mouth of a kid younger than her just sends chills down my spine. I mean, Chuckie could get seriously hurt if Angelica gets anywhere near his face with that thing. Like, what if she slips and gets him in the eye? Or if she gets him in the mouth, stabbing him in the throat or something? She literally has no idea what she's doing, and she could cause life-altering damage to Chuckie with her carelessness here. And I mean, it's just so messed up the way that she dismisses all of his concerns. Like, he brings up how he's gonna eat food now without his teeth, and she just brushes it off, saying that he's gonna have to switch back to bananas and mashed potatoes for a few years. Like, that's not a massive deal to put on someone. Especially when you yourself are refusing to give up even a single one of your own plentiful teeth. Not to mention the fact that she's even got Tommy in on it, and they're talking about splitting Chuckie's Tooth Fairy money 3 ways. And like, you know she's got an ulterior motive. She's so selfish and greedy that it won't surprise any of us when she decides to keep all the money for herself if she does end up going through with any of this. She's just that evil of a kid naturally. Not to mention, like, let's say she is successful in getting these 2 teeth out of Chucky's mouth, do you know how much care needs to be put into not only doing that, but the care process afterward? Even for baby teeth, pulling them before they're ready to come out is definitely something that needs to be done with care and by a dentist if that's really necessary. Not by an unhinged 3-year-old armed with a screwdriver. Just like that though, Angelica decides to put Chucky's mind at ease by giving him a demonstration. She crams a toy ball into the toy box, closing the lid on it, showing how you can't pull it out because it's stuck, like his tooth. But with the screwdriver, she can pick and pry and help it get out easier. Nevertheless, when the ball explodes, being torn to shreds, they ultimately decide that isn't the best choice here, instead opting for a trick that she saw on TV. Angelica piles a bunch of random stuff from around the house nice and high up, holding some string, planning to tie them to Chucky's teeth and kick him down to the ground below, ripping his teeth out in the process. But yet again, when the doll Angelica uses for an example gets destroyed, they decide not to go through with it. Instead, opting to do the same exact thing, but tying the string to Spike's tail instead, having him run and rip Chucky's teeth out. Of course, recognizing this is a terrible idea, Chucky says he's not doing it, but Angelica disregards his opinions, saying they're doing it anyway.
Stand still! No! Yes! No! Yes! No! Yes!
Angelica gets wildly dragged through the whole house as Spike runs in fear, until eventually she ends up getting hurled across the kitchen and into the fridge. But you and I really need to pause for a second here and just take in how sad that this moment is. Not only is Chucky being tormented by Angelica and pushed into having his only 2 teeth forcefully extracted from his mouth before they're ready, but now she's literally abusing Spike. Tying a rope, string, or anything to a dog's tail is straight up abuse. That tail is an elongation of their spine. Angelica holding onto that string and tying it to Spike with intentions of pulling things comes with the inherent implication that she's planning on basically yanking on his spine, which of course is incredibly dangerous for any animal. That could cause permanent damage, let alone be incredibly painful, whether Angelica knows what she's doing or not. Just because she doesn't know that it's going to cause pain doesn't mean that it's okay for her to do. And she knows good and well that tearing someone's front teeth out of their mouth is going to hurt. That's why she doesn't want any of her own teeth to be pulled out for the Tooth Fairy. I mean, this episode was one that really just paints Angelica in the most vile and malicious light. She's careless, she's selfish, and she's just straight up acting like the spawn of Satan, targeting innocent kids and animals in such a predatory and greedy way. With Angelica's idea being a dud, though, she says that she's got one final idea as she walks off, telling the babies to stay right here. And at this moment, Chucky decides that it's finally time for him to speak up. He tells Tommy that he's not really wanting to do this and that he likes having his teeth where they are, and that he really doesn't want Angelica to pull his teeth out. And with Tommy having genuinely heard Chucky out, he says that it's okay, and that he doesn't have to do it if he doesn't want to. He tells Chucky not to worry, and that when Angelica gets back, they're going to tell her that they're not doing it. But just then, Angelica walks in, and we see her most putrid, vile colors show. She starts mocking them, talking about how sweet it is that Tommy is sticking up for his best friend who's so scared at this moment.
There's just one little problem. I'm getting those teeth if it's the last thing I ever do!
Chucky screams and runs for his life with Angelica in hot pursuit. armed with the pliers and ready to forcefully pull his teeth out one by one. But in the process of chasing them, Angelica ends up dishing out her own comeuppance directly to herself when she plows face first right into a wall, knocking herself unconscious. And when she comes to, confused about what happened, she ends up feeling around inside her mouth with her tongue, noticing that it feels different, as she spits a tooth out right into her hand. She starts to celebrate, cheering and gloating about how she's going to be rich as she rubs it right into Chuckie and Tommy's faces, saying that she's not going to share a single penny with them. Thankfully, though, they don't really seem to care, as they know good and well that they're going to have their time with the Tooth Fairy when they're good and ready. As time goes on, though, we end up fast-forwarding a few days where we see Chuckie and Tommy hanging out by themselves in their playpen, totally bored, when all of a sudden the doorbell rings. And finally, for a nice change of pace, Stu answers it this time instead of Dee Dee, to find none other than Drew standing there alongside an absolutely pissed off Angelica. As they walk on in, Chuckie and Tommy ask her if she's rich now, super curious about how the Tooth Fairy played out. However, much to their surprise, Angelica pulls a single dime out of her pocket as she scornfully throws it to the ground, proclaiming the Tooth Fairy to be nothing but a no-good, lying cheapskate. And just like that, as Chuckie picks up the dime that Angelica tossed without care, claiming it for himself, the episode comes to an end. Now, I gotta admit, this one might have the sweetest ending out of all the episodes that we've checked out so far, despite it being one of the most twisted and messed up. However, I don't mean sweet like kind and warm and fuzzy. I mean sweet as in Chuckie got that sweet, sweet revenge and he didn't even have to try. He spoke up for himself, stopped Angelica in her evil plot, and in the long run, he didn't lose any teeth himself. And he got Angelica's Tooth Fairy money. It's one of those where we got to see Angelica and her negative intentions return to her in the most consequential way. It wasn't enough for her to faceplant into the wall and lose a tooth, or for her to be salty about how little money she got for that tooth. It's the fact that Chuckie ended up in possession of that money that really acted as the cherry on top here. That moment is just karma coming full circle in the most glorious way, not only in the simple fact that the dime was in Chuckie's possession now, but also the fact that Chuckie actually had a genuine appreciation for the dime in a way that Angelica didn't. He may as well have been rich in his eyes because he really did find so much value in it that Angelica wasn't able to see. Not only does that highlight the fact that one man's trash is another man's treasure, but it also highlights the value in seeing the world through a glass half full point of view. Which is interesting because Chuckie is a terrified, paranoid kid who's constantly looking over his shoulder. But despite that, he still looks at life on the bright side, and truly, that's an admirable trait. The fact that someone as terrified as he is of the world could look at it and still see beauty really does say a lot about his character. Furthermore, another aspect that's truly interesting is Chuckie's reactions to all of this. I mean, Angelica was ready to go full-blown Art the Clown mode, wanting to use a sharp screwdriver to literally pick Chuckie's teeth out of his head one by one. Her actions here invoke such a ferocious level of terror, in my opinion. I mean, some people can barely handle going to the dentist and getting a cavity filled, let alone the thought of someone who has no idea what they're doing trying to use an object that isn't meant for teeth to remove teeth from their mouth. It invokes potentially the most relatable and overwhelming sense of fear. What's crazy, though, is the fact that Chucky's reaction to all this was rather tame. I mean, we've seen him have way more over-the-top reactions to less threats than this. His screams of terror and his fear here were pretty massive, don't get me wrong, but even then they were rather par for the course as far as his normal baseline level of fear and panic responses go. Like, for me personally, I would have had way more of an explosive dramatic response to someone trying to forcefully torture me with multiple violent tooth extractions. Chuckie just kind of screamed and ran like normal, which, by all means, could have been because he didn't genuinely understand the implications of having Angelica rip his teeth out, but still, it's odd to take in because we know that genuinely Chuckie is capable of over-the-top extreme reactions. He's able to express a level of reaction warranted by a potentially dire situation, and we've seen that before. So the fact that he wasn't here just feels a little odd. Especially because Angelica was posing a genuine threat to him. His freakout here was nothing compared to the freakout that he had in his nightmare about her executing him, and that wasn't even real. Though it may have felt real to him. In this instance here, though, her genuinely approaching with sharp implements and pliers, wanting to actually get at his mouth, is no joking matter. She really could have done some serious damage, and the fact that his reaction showed itself the way that it was is definitely a huge indicator that he wasn't aware of the level of danger that he was actually in. And in hindsight, that's actually pretty insane. Because we know Chuckie as the kid who is hyper aware of danger. He's always searching for it in every corner, terrified and trying to run from it at all costs. The fact that he would see a normal, everyday situation that isn't even scary and assume some fatal level of danger, meanwhile, when there's actually a real level of danger that could alter him for life, he would just perceive it as a normal level of danger. It's really just concerning in a way that's tough to put into words. It's hard to pin down, but with that being said, that sentiment brings a specific episode to mind. One that would see Chuckie facing a scenario that would shake him to his core in such a dramatic way that neither him nor his father would ever be the same again. One where, yet again, he's facing a situation that could potentially change him for the rest of his life. And that episode would be none other than